Your favorite memory of yourself. You know, a time when you did something that gave you that warm feeling in your stomach or heart afterwards, or maybe when you did something small, maybe something that nobody else even knew about that you were proud of. Or maybe a time, maybe a time when that beloved grandmother or grandfather just reached over and patted you on the back and said, it's okay. It's going to be okay. Or that was a good job you did in school. What are some of those favorite memories? Anybody willing? Yes, ma'am.
I'll start.
Good, thank you.
I'm Langlios, actually born in Southern Central America.
Oh, okay.
So my first memory that I did for myself is when I got my master's degree.
Wow.
Now, I'm the first one in my family to even have a college degree.
Wow.
So I was very proud.
Absolutely.
Very proud of my family.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. Okay. And congratulations. Yeah. Another.
February 2nd, 1983.
February 2nd, 1983.
10 o'clock in the morning. I got the letter from the Texas State Board of Public Accounting that I passed the exam. Oh my God.
Wow.
Yeah, I didn't, not to say that, I had to take it 5 times.
Well, most of us do. I remember that. Those hours spent studying for the CPA exam with great grief. I will tell you that much. Anything from childhood? Yes, ma'am.
I went way back. I was in elementary school, probably early grade elementary school, and we had an assignment to read some stories in a book and write a short synopsis of each story. So I'm thinking I was probably about 3rd grade. I was a very bad procrastinator, and I had started this project and stopped it 15 times. I can even remember the first story was about climbing a greased pole. That's all I remember about it. But I had put it off forever, and it was due the next day.
Right.
So I went and closed myself into a room in the house that no one else used and did the whole thing in one day and got it done. But that was a lesson learned for the rest of my life about not procrastinating.
Wow, and you're lucky to have heard that so early on. Isn't she lucky? Because most of us are. Yeah.
I got myself in a very bad state and I got myself out of it, but it was really a lesson.
Wow. Excellent. How about this side of the room? Any memory, specific favorite memory? It can be small, doesn't have to be dramatic. Oh, this side of the room is going to be a problem. I can tell. Okay. Well, what would it be like to take that favorite memory or another favorite memory and be able to hold it inside yourself? We clearly, as human beings, possess memory. We also possess the wonderful capacity to give meaning to memory. And what if you could take those feelings, that memory, and you could give it away as a gift to someone else? Whatever it is, that wisdom, that joy, that lesson learned, that feeling of elation, that tremendous well-earned pride, if you could take that and you could give it away as a gift to someone else. That's what we do when we write memoir and personal story. We take something that is inside of us. And like I say, it doesn't have to be dramatic. In fact, that is one of the biggest misconceptions about memoir writing. I hear people say all the time, because I do a lot of consulting with writers, people who want to write a book. And people say, I'd love to write a memoir, but I'm not famous already. Well, okay, nobody's going to give you a $13 million advance. But a lot of times what matters the most to other people is writing from people like themselves, right? So when we write memoir, when we take these personal stories, we invest not just in the memory itself, we invest in the meaning of memory. Now, I want to contrast this, or sort of relate it to, it's a better word, narrative. What's the easiest way to understand narrative for you? If somebody says, I'm going to tell you a narrative about my taxes. I'm going to tell you the school district's narrative about tax. Information, okay. Storytelling. Narrative tends to involve an ongoing story, okay? And this is where we're going to get very nicely, make a transition into story, because we need, I think it's important, looking at narrative, looking at memoir, writing from our memory, to understand how story is used when it's a fictional story and how story is used when it's non-fictional. What's the common sense definition of fiction in your mind?
Not real, not true.
Not real, not true. Didn't happen. I made it up. If I as a writer, can I use you as an example? I as a writer have a contract with my reader, always. It's an ethical contract among other things. The contract in fiction, if this was a fiction book, my contract with you, the reader, is I made this up. It may be based on a friend of mine or an experience of mine or passing that TPIA exam or whatever, but this is the best I can do, making it up and having it hang together. However, if I have a contract with, may I use you an example? With this reader here, I say, this is memoir. This is personal story. What's a contract there? It happened. Yes, it's true. Now, how many of you have siblings? All right. I want you to think back to a birthday party, either for yourself or a sibling. Especially if there was some big dramatic, terrible thing happened. Like somebody got hysterics, or you know, the birthday, kitchen curtains caught on fire, whatever. Think back to birthday, you and a sibling. Maybe somebody raised your hand and you tell me briefly your version of that birthday party. Tell me your sibling's version of that birthday party. Especially if they're different. Anybody, does that ring any bells for anybody? Might not.
Probably my 7th birthday.
Your 7th birthday?
7th birthday, had a house full of all of my friends and closest cousins. I don't remember who upset me, but I ended up leaving because I was crying and walked about a block away from home and was sitting on the side of a creek by a tree. My older brother came and found me, and nobody else was able to talk to me. He comes and talks to me and asks me what's going on, and all he said was, you better get from under that tree before a bird drops something on your head. I did not understand what he was talking about. He was like, get up, little girl, come on back home. And I sat there and literally remember thinking it was just the worst birthday I've ever had in my entire life, and it was just because of that moment. And then I can actually remember finally going back home and was like, okay, it's really not that bad, and at least somebody cared enough about my feelings to come and find me.
Yeah,
Now,
absolutely.
in his mind, I'm pretty sure that's my older brother. In his mind, he's always been my protector. So in his mind, it was, okay, she gave me one of her fits, let me go get her.
Absolutely, absolutely. So if you, as a memoir writer, wrote the narrative of that birthday, it's going to sound one way, right? And if the wonderful sort of hero older brother wrote it, or maybe even mom or dad, it's going to be way different. Yes. Is that a problem?
No.
No. No. Although a lot of people that want to write memoir, it's easy to get sort of tied up in worrying about, well, you know, what if my sibling, mom, dad, uncle, aunt, grandpa, well, whoever, you know, reads this and they get upset because or they do read it and they get upset and they're like, well, that was a wonderful birthday party. What do you mean? What if mom reads it? I made your favorite cake. I spent 6 weeks making that dress for you. So this is a good opportunity for us to sort of expand and revitalize our definition of memoir writing, so that we're very clear that we as a writer, each one of you as a potential memoir writer, are the only one who can write from your perspective. It sounds common sense, but as y'all have been around the block enough to know, sometimes it sounds common sense, things that can sound common sense, especially when the speaker's up here saying it, right? When you get home and you start working on something, may not be clear anymore. And that is one of the great powers of memoir writing, is that, and may I use your story as a little example? Okay, that child sitting by the creek, feeling terrible, has her own clarity of meaning and vision. Just like the wonderful older brother who has a different one. And both are quote unquote true. Both happened the way we talked about earlier. Let me get the next page here. Let's stir up any questions for people. Anything? Okay. All right, so I told you I would also deal with the definition of story in terms of fiction and the definition of story when we're writing nonfiction, such as memoir. In fiction, we have a narrative. It's usually called a plot. Narrative is a fancy word for it. It has a beginning, there's a struggle, or what's called conflict, and there's a resolution. That's whether you have a novel or a short story. If I'm writing memoir, what's the natural ending?
Could be that event just ended.
Could be that event just ended. What else?
Personal recap or personal reflection?
Personal reflection, very good, yeah. Sort of a coming to figuring out the meaning. Does the story end? Am I still alive?
Yeah.
I mean, I hope so. Right. You're all alive. If you write about something that's sourced in your memory, you're still alive when you finish it. So it's not as clear cut as fiction. Like think of the Hollywood movie. Hollywood is so good at doing these things. Beginning, big brouhaha conflict, whatever kind of conflict there is. They throw in whatever glittery stuff they need to throw in, and then it ends, and everything's wonderful. Right? That's why people love going to the movies. It's not like real life, right? Because most of us, I might say, never get to that glowing moment where we ride off in the sunset and everything's fine, wonderful forever, because that's make-believe. But in memoir, the story doesn't end because we're still alive. The event may end, the book may end, but the story, we hope, continues to go on and on, because we certainly want to enjoy our long lives. Let's see. Alrighty. What questions can come up from family as we start writing memoir? We start assigning meaning.
Are you going to include me in your book?
Yeah. Are you going to put me in your book?
And how are they going to reflect?
And I'm sorry.
Going to be reflected in the book.
Are you going to make me look good? Don't make me look too bad. All right, what else? I think I heard some murmuring over here. I'm going to have to take everybody over here and put them over here, aren't I? Or vice versa.
They're probably arguing about facts. I don't know if you remembered that the right way.
Right. the boat was blue. No, I'm sure in 1957 the boat was red. I'm a friend, fellow writer, very famous fellow writer who, you know, the racing boat was blue. No, it was red. Here's a photograph. I don't care. It was this other color. You know, okay. Well, here's one thing that we need to be very careful about, because of course there is an ethics about writing memoir, right? We don't ever want to assume there's not an ethics about what we write, whether it's for pleasure, for fun. Certainly if it's for, we want to share it with the public, we need to be aware of ethics. And, you know, readers this day, just like kids this day, are very sophisticated. So if somebody's writing about something that happened to them, and the main purpose is to get revenge, how do you think readers react to that? Yeah, say a little louder. Not good?
That's negative.
Right. Readers can sniff that out, right? Now, how do we, as potential memoir writers, guard against letting that kind of thing, whether it's revenge, maybe belittling, you know, that first husband, you know, really, you know, I don't know, whatever, or that first wife, whatever example you might want to laugh at, hearing other people talk about. We need to be absolutely committed to understanding and writing complexity. Now, let's have a little conversation about complexity and simplicity. Do you know anybody that's a simple person? Just doesn't have moods. Let me define this a little better for you. Doesn't have moods, doesn't have contradictions, isn't ever a paradox, is always easy, super easy to deal with. Does anybody know anybody like that? I mean, if your boss is in here, you need to raise your hand and say, my supervisor. My supervisor was that saint, okay?
They better phrase that.
Yeah. Okay, anyway, so your supervisor's that saint, but most everybody else in your life is complex, right? Do you consider yourself a complex person? For whatever reason, personal history, personality, hopes, joys, disappointments, challenges you've had to face and overcome, for instance, or challenges you've faced and they got the best of you, and you had to sort of go off and, you know, have the dark night of the soul and try to figure out how to recover and how to heal and so forth. I think as human beings, most of this stuff is very intrinsic in our day-to-day, year-to-year lives. As memoir writers, it is our job to bring that complexity to the page. How might we do that? What sort of general words or general thoughts could you bring to show that you're a compassionate writer? I'm not saying you lie. I'm saying a compassionate writer who understands the complexity, not just of the people you admire and like that are in your memoir writing, but maybe the people you don't like and do not admire. How might we write complexity about people?
Good and bad.
Right. Give a balanced picture. Good and bad characteristics. What else?
Facts.
I'm sorry?
Facts.
Facts. Okay. Give me an example.
Instead of giving your opinion, just say what happened.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Very good. How about the realm of imagination? Because in memoir, even though we're writing what happened, let's say, I'm going to read to you from a little bit, some excerpts from this book to show you how other young writers did it. But let's say I'm writing about, there is a piece in there about a young woman, college undergraduate, picking up her dad at work and smelling the cigarette smoke on him, even though he swears on the Bible, swears to mom, up and down, all the time, he no longer smokes.
So sorry.
It's my agent.
I do it.
No problem. So she's seeing someone she loves, her father, who cannot cope with a problem in his life, this addiction to nicotine, and to cover up lies to his family, even though he's telling his family all the time, it's wrong to lie, you know, don't lie, act with integrity and so forth. And she's writing about this, and she uses a realm of imagination. I mean, she tells the facts, which is an excellent point, place to start, but then she also evolves into, I wonder why. He's such a good man. I wonder why. And that's not a direct quote, but that's sort of the subtext of her writing. You know, I love him, you know. So she introduces complexity and subtlety, nuance. Because remember, even though there are times when a simple approach to life is extremely valuable and necessary, because we're all covered over in our culture with so much noise, right? The noise of the daily 10,000 emails, you know, 5,000 texts, things ringing, beeping. I can always tell when my husband's in the house. I'm self-employed, so I work at home, and when only I'm there, it's like a convent. It's very, very, very quiet, because that's when I need to concentrate. But when he's there, boom, chime, ding, da 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 da. You know, and most of us are overwhelmed. It's not just like a gentle breeze of noise and interruptions. It's a hurricane or tsunami of that. So we are fighting to deal with that. We often try to get things simpler. Whereas in our memoir writing, what we're going to do is expand complexity, because that's part of creating meaning. Now, what are some objections that might come to your mind, naturally come to your mind, when somebody like me gets up here and says, okay, I'm a writing teacher, you can write, anyone can write, and write well. What are some objections that might come into your mind?
No, I can't do that. That's not something I can do.
Okay, but why? Excuse me. But why might that objection come to your mind?
Something that I'm not used to doing and not familiar with doing.
Okay, I don't already know how to do it. What else?
Thinking that it may not be important enough to write about.
Oh, yes,
Um,
absolutely. Thinking it's not important enough to write about.
or that you might not think somebody else would want to read it.
You might not think you have an
That would be
audience.
disappointing. Then you'd be disappointed.
Okay, they might be disappointed. You would be disappointed. What else? All right, I'm going to hone in on this side of the room. What else? Yes, sir.
Okay, I've written a couple of things that were, I think, important, but not all that exciting or interesting. So my goal was how going into fiction, how to liven it up and make it more readable and interesting.
Okay.
Not like Brian Williams, right?
Yeah. How do I make it more interesting? It's not interesting enough yet. How do I become a better writer? You know, not a single person in here, and this is probably because you're educators, but have come up with an objection that I see a lot of times. Let me get my other page, my other list, which is, I don't know how to spell. That comes up a lot. with people in the general public, oh, I can't be a writer because I can't spell perfectly. That could come up. Comes up for a lot of kids also, right?
You're on a computer, spell check.
Well,
I mean, you're going to be correct.
yeah, I mean, you know, that's, yes, David?
But a lot of people who don't spell well or don't have good grammar, punctuation, sentence structure, don't know it.
Right. And also, you know, and of course, you know, for better or for worse, I mean, if I had a magic wand, there's lots of things I would do, but one of them would probably be get rid of spell check on every computer worldwide, because it's a crutch that's often broken, because it leads you to wrong decisions. We talked about I'm not famous, I'm not important. And of course, I, as a creative writing teacher, am going to tell you, none of that matters. None of that matters. I'm not famous, I don't have an audience, I can't spell. I'm a business type. I'm a tax accountant. You cannot expect me to write something interesting. Or whatever, you know, whatever it is. I'm sort of sticking the little barb in the tax accountants because I used to be one. So here's a chance for me to share my core beliefs about the teaching of writing. And I've been teaching, as I mentioned earlier, for about 15 years, all levels. I have people that I work with that are American Book Award finalists. I have people I work with that are, you know, they're third graders in the near north side. I love working with all writers. So here's my core beliefs. Anyone can learn to write, and anyone can learn to write well. Absolutely, for sure. Anyone can tap into the power and joy of creating with words. That's there for all of us to tap into, if we choose. Words, I believe, are our greatest inheritance. And I encourage all my people, all my students, to learn one new word a day. And if you can't, and one word a day is too much, since you get 5,000 emails and you're overwhelmed by the tsunami of responsibilities that we all carry in today's modern world. Learn one new word a week. There's no way. If you're asking a person to write and enjoy writing and be able to express those inexpressible intangibles deep in your guts and deep in your memory, you can't do that without tools, and words are your tools. Just like grammar and punctuation. Grammar and punctuation is not easy for any of us, I don't think. I mean, I used to take a grammar book to bed, and I would read the section on commas, which are certainly one of the most abstruse constructions in the English language. And I would reread it, and I would reread it every night for maybe 3 months, till I memorized it. I mean, I just, had that commitment. But if you don't have that commitment, but you want to be a writer, write anyway. Hire somebody then to help you out. Or get your best friend who maybe loves commas, like weird me.
We tend to write a lot, policies and procedures, and how to do this and do that. And in writing, and I found out when I was writing myself, is that for me, my problem was that I would write and think in Spanish.
Oh.
And so when you put the words down, I'm writing and doing that in English, but I'm thinking in Spanish because of my dual language.
Right.
And so when I express myself in Spanish, it doesn't translate well. I have to, that's not how you would do that in proper English.
Right.
So you got a lot of, I guess the tense tends to be lost when you speak in Spanish rather than in English. And that's where I think for me sometimes they say, well, what are you trying to say? Well, it's because I'm thinking, my thought has been in Spanish. I mean, I used to be even when you go work out, we all talk about, you're doing a set of 10, and you go 1, 2, whatever. I do it in Spanish. In my thought, I'm counting in Spanish.
Right.
Most people don't do that. Or maybe they'll count in German or in some of the language. But I happen to do that in Spanish. So I find myself thinking in the Spanish language, and yet I have to function in the English language. And so the way that I express myself, I'm having to go and edit a lot of my work because that's not how you would say that.
Right. So you've really, to your credit, taken on a huge additional layer of interpretation in what
Because I had to understand it first in one language, then translate it and be able to do that. Now, because I learned Spanish first, right? I had my education up to 12 years, so I didn't speak that until I was 13 years old.
Wow.
So had to make a huge transition in everything I do. That first I learned it and then I translate it.
Right. Wow. That's amazing. I mean,
Different.
yeah. And the number of words that are available in the two languages are very different. So you have a lot of nuances in the English language that are not there in the Spanish language. So that makes it even more of a challenge vocabulary-wise as well. One of my specialties has always been working with people that are afraid to write. When I was a visiting scholar at the University of Houston, Center for Mexican American Studies, I had the pleasure of teaching a course in memoir and Mexican American identity. And so we read other Mexican American writers who have written memoir. And then we also wrote memoir. So the core of this book, not all of it, but the core of this book were 22 students that I had over a 2-year period at the University of Houston writing memoir. And of course, I will say, for all of us, and including myself as a professional writer, revision is tough. Revision is very necessary and tough. No one ever taught me how to revise my writing. I had to teach myself through the nitty-gritty, the equivalent, whatever the psychological equivalent would be of shutting yourself in the room that nobody used and gritting your teeth and bearing down and doing that. That's how I taught myself to revise. So I always try to teach my students how to revise their writing, how to see the internal text, the structure of the text as well as the subtext, what the deep and mysterious, beautiful river is running underneath the text. That's a subtext, and I try to teach them. So I'm going to read a couple little segments here. Most of these, well, not most, a lot of these students have gone on and are teachers of creative writing, or they teach teachers of creative writing. Almost all of them work in school districts all around the U.S., so I'm so proud of my kids. All righty. I'm very careful when I give writing assignments in class to make sure that they cover specific skills as well as are open enough to engage the participants' imagination, and in this case, memory. So this particular assignment, I asked the students to take out a piece of notebook paper and write down a whole list of names that have been called. Nothing romantic, nothing off color. I said, just pretend I'm your grandmother and you don't want to embarrass me, but write down a list of sports nicknames, your dad's nickname for you, maybe your baptismal name, whatever it is. And then I have them circle 3 and then write about one of those names. So this that I'm going to read to you right now came out of that assignment. And the name that this young Mexican-American student wrote about, I think she was a freshman or sophomore at the University of Houston when she wrote this, was Shira, which is you'll see the story here. When I was a little girl, my father used to call me Shira, after the heroine on the 80s cartoon, Masters of the Universe. I always thought of her as a strong, kick-butt, comb bra wearing chick. I had her pajamas, action figures, and even a lunchbox with a matching thermos. I loved her. I really, really liked that nickname, and I admired what she stood for. My dad hasn't called me that in years, but every time I think about it, I smile inside and get that warmth that accompanies fond memories. I have a t-shirt I found about a year ago with her picture on it. She's got a sword in her hand and is kicking the crap out of some alien guy. Maybe that's why I liked her so much. Even though she was a girl, even though she had blonde hair, she rocked. She wore gold go-go boots and saved the world at the same time, holding her own with the strong, shirtless males around her. As I was buying the shirt, my mom asked me if my dad still called me Shira. That is when I realized he hadn't in a long time. And I didn't know why, but it really hurt. I almost wanted to cry. I answered her with a one-worded thud of no, and quickly paid the salesman as a way of changing the subject. You know, maybe my dad thinks I don't need to hear that nickname anymore. Maybe he thinks I'm too old for a childhood cartoon. I don't know, but I know I miss it. My dad and I have a healthy relationship. We simply don't have much to talk about anymore. I hate that. I hate that we don't have a favorite television show in common. I hate that he doesn't listen to rock and roll anymore. I hate that the only thing we really talk about is church. I hate that he doesn't love my purple, red-colored hair, and what I really hate is that I'm no longer his little girl. I'm no longer his Shira. That's author Juanita Montoya. So that really lovely little memoir piece, what does it show you or make you think about in terms of some of the concepts we've been discussing here? Or I guess I've been lecturing, actually, but that we've been discussing here about memoir. Or just what are your reactions to the piece? I should come over here, right? This is the side of the flag. Anybody?
Well, since I'm being absolute about that, I mean, just kind of cutting him slack that he's got his reasons for maybe not acting like she's hoping.
Yeah.
Maybe he doesn't want to.
Yeah.
Maybe she doesn't want to. He's taking some slack.
She's cutting him some slack. She's not being absolute, saying that old guy, you know, he's just a mean old guy. You know, and if we continued, I didn't because of time, but if we continued in the next couple paragraphs, she says, well, you know, if he doesn't talk to me on the way home when he picks me up at school, maybe it's because I don't talk to him. And, you know, she goes on like that. What else? I think I saw some other, yes?
She expressed a really deep feeling.
Yeah.
It
Yeah.
really came down to her heart and expressed what she was thinking about.
Mm-hmm. She really, I love the way you put that, she really goes down to her heart and gives us that gift on the page. Yeah, yeah. What else? Yes, sir.
As a father of 5 daughters, she seemed to talk about not only her feelings, she kind of gave his side of the story too. We're talking about church now. I don't like, he's just talking about church, and I don't like that he doesn't like my hair. It's colored in several different styles. I'm sure Dad's probably freaking out.
Yeah, Dad, I'm sure, remember how we talked about the birthday party?
Yeah.
And the 7-year-old birthday party, and there's this version, but there's also this version? Yeah.
He did a good job of kind of letting in, he only talked about his hip, and he might not like this and that. So
Right.
there's both sides of the story there.
Right, she's very even-handed in presenting, and not pointing a finger of blame, isn't she? Yeah, isn't that lovely? Yeah. Anything else? Let me check my time.
Well, she obviously had feelings as far as feeling like Daddy's little girl.
Mm-hmm.
And she's maturing now, she's in college, and now she does, to me, it seems as if she doesn't feel like she has that special place in his heart anymore.
Yes, you're very, very accurate. She feels like she doesn't have that special place in his heart anymore. And it hurts her heart. It definitely hurts her heart, which probably, again, thinking of Dad's side, he's looking over there and seeing the extreme hair and the extreme colors and the silence and whatever else, he's probably thinking, my daughter doesn't even care about me anymore. Look at this.
But I also think that she realizes that it's not maybe his fault, and that maybe they're both at fault.
I think so, yes, absolutely. I think she does, and in fact,
As things change, and that was a moment in life that I'm Daddy's little girl.
Mm-hmm.
Well, she's grown up, and perhaps maybe she's looking for something to replace that with that would fit the time today.
Mm-hmm. So in lieu of reading the second example I brought you, let me just continue, because I think this will really be fun for you to sort of expand your understanding of memoir writing. The last line I had read previously was, I'm no longer his Shira. So, next paragraph. But things are getting better. Slowly, things are improving. If I'm honest with myself, I was partly to blame. I didn't care to see that while my father may not always care for the latest punk bands, he still knows more about Bob Dylan or Bruce Springsteen than anyone else I know. If he doesn't seem to pay attention to what I am reading, it may be because I don't offer to share. Our car rides home sometimes may be heavy with silence, but that's because I don't always speak up. It doesn't always have to be this way. As I grow older, I will change, and so will he. And we'll notice what we have in common more than we'll notice our differences. To be close to my father, I don't have to be a, quote, daddy's little girl, unquote. I can be myself, and he can be who he is. Things will be different. So, very lovely illustration of how the memoir writer goes ahead, honors a complexity both of the person she's writing about and inside herself, to create meaning. That's other than telling the story, just the facts of the story and narrative, the other vitally important dynamic narrative writing memoir writing must have is to assign meaning. Because each one of us as human beings does that differently. Okay? So, Q&A, we have just a few minutes. I need to stay on track here for the next presenter. What are some thoughts that have come up, or reactions, questions? Could you do that? Could you put your heart on the page? With some good instruction.
I can tell you a story about that, what you were explaining about being a dual language. Spanish is my first language, English is my second. But I had the opposite with my daughter. For her, English is the first language and Spanish is the second language. So she keeps correcting me, and I keep correcting her. And that's how we teach each other. The number two, I challenge himself to be out of the comfort zone. Number one, it shows that my accent will never go away. So I had to accept it. because I would not be who I am if I changed that. That was my first perception. Second is when I started university. They said, oh, because you're like, you're Spanish, you have to take the special classes, and I refused. I said, give me the challenge. Give me the opportunity to show you that I can, and I can write English. So I took 2 film literature classes. It was very challenging because I never thought, oh, this is, you're gonna watch a movie and then we're gonna write it. It's gonna be so fun. Until I took the class.
I've had that happen in classes. Yeah, I bet we all have. Yeah.
Right. And so I had to actually see the movie, write an essay about the movie. Actually, it was very complex movie. We watched this movie, Western movies. And remember that, I was getting into the culture, so I didn't know nothing about cowboys and nothing about that.
Well, you can watch that whole movie and still not know anything about real cowboys. As I understand it, I mean, I'm certainly not a cowboy myself, so.
But what the lesson learned for me is that I challenge myself to going out of the comfort zone. Because that was my biggest problem, being in a comfort zone that, I'm going to work at. And I did. And actually, I keep saying to myself, I'm going to write a book about my life. Because it's very complex, like you said, and try to keep a balance into the story. And I'm still having a hard time. I have the title, but I still have not written the book.
Well, there's nothing like the impetus for that deadlines give a writer. And I've been a professional writer for almost 15 years. But life is so busy and so complex, even for me, and I do not have children, and I don't have a complex household, like I don't have 10 dogs or anything, or 6 cats. And the only time I work on something is when I have a deadline. I think it's human nature. So you might consider taking a course, a writing course of whatever type. It doesn't have to be at a university, but however that works for you, so that you have some deadlines so you're forced to produce. Yeah. Any sort of closing, any other questions, any sort of, yes ma'am?
Quick question. When it comes down to writing, I know it comes to the point about how you feel, because a lot of good writing I learned when I was in school, and it's old books, and you had a good feeling, even some of the old movies that you go back, I think I can remember when I was in school, that was one, the class took us to a movie theater, and we saw this movie, and it was called Sara. It's about that dog. And the complexity that went along with it as to how that dog got his name.
Oh, wow.
And the feeling that you get from it is just not just the dog, but how the dog involved the town, the people in general. So the thing about it, when it comes down to writing, is that really necessary for writers? So we have the view that writers have to go off, just go to an island or go somewhere in the distance to start writing, get the head clear, go in a cabin. Is that necessary?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. All that it requires to be a writer is what you have in front of you right now, pen and paper. Some of you have computers. Now, it helps, there's certain things that help, like a class, a teacher, a mentor. Some people love certain genres. Some people just are dying to be a poet. Some people are dying to write essays. Some people are dying to write prayers. There's just a million kinds. So it helps you to give focus. But no, if you wait until time unrolls like a beautiful white silk sheet in front of you, gorgeous and unbroken and just billowing in the gentle breeze, if you wait until you have that to be a writer, you're going to be dead first. It's just that, so actually, and I know a lot of writers, of course, because I edit so many anthologies, and these are my peers and colleagues and so forth. And I present a lot of national conventions and state conventions and so forth. And everybody is grappling with all the stuff, quote unquote, that you and I, and I'm sure everybody in this room grapples with. Kids, grandkids, sick dogs, hurt kitties, you know, every once in a while a water pipe that busts at an inconvenient time, you know, but people who get writing done figure out, they make it a priority somehow within their week. When I was a full-time police officer, the only time I got to write was about 20 minutes when I got home. And I would pull out my, I'm a longhand writer. I write everything in longhand, about the first 10 drafts or so. So I would pull out my deal, notebook paper, and write. And if I got an idea, the first line of a poem, because that's how poems come to me, I would write it on paper napkins, whatever I had available. So the real key is internal, it's mental, it's like everything else. If it's important to you, like that degree was, that CPA license was, if it's important to you, you figure out how somehow you make it a priority within your day-to-day life. So I'm sorry, I'm going on too long, but I appreciate the question. It was a good question. Jesus, is there anything else you can see I should do? Oh, and I have books for sale. I don't think I mentioned that. So during break, if any of you feel motivated, I'll meet you at that table. Y'all have been a fabulous audience. Thank you very much.
Well, thanks, Sara, for coming out this morning. I appreciate your presentation. And I want to tell you about a movie, guys, about writing. Have you guys ever seen the movie Finding Forrester with Sean Connery? What an excellent movie. And as I was writing part of my dissertation, and there was a scene where he says, don't think, just write. Get that typewriter and start writing. And that's what my chair told me, just write. But grammar, all that stuff will come later and we'll fix it up later, but that's a great movie. Our next speaker, and I want to apologize to him because I should have updated the agenda, and I didn't. I guess I must have slept somewhere along the line, and I didn't do that. This is not Steve. This is Jon Karp. He's a tax planner with Whitley Penn, and just teasing him if he brought a tax book that he can write. But he's going to tell you all about that. And so he'll introduce himself. And he's got a lot of accolades in his bio, so he'll probably tell you all about that. So please help me welcome Jon Karp.
All right, thank you. So before I introduce myself, I actually just want to say that as Sara got up here and spoke, it's kind of odd that you'd have two speakers in a row that would have so much in common. All right, so first, Sara has a degree in religious studies. Like if someone would have told me that I was going to go to school and be an accountant, I think the Grand Canyon side looked good to jump. I mean, I have a degree in anthropology and religious studies out of SMU. So the fact that I became a CPA is like nowhere near what I was studying. And then as she closed, she used this entire story about a Shira. Well, she had no idea that I have a Shira. And that my daughter's name is Shira, who is 5'8.5", who is not my little girl anymore. And so as she started talking about this, all of a sudden I was thinking, and she's talking about like, putting your feelings on words and talking, that she doesn't go talk to her dad. And so yesterday my daughter goes out, she goes to this new private school that she wants to think about going to. And so my wife, last night as she went to bed, my wife Lori said to me, she said, John, did you even ask Shira about her day at school? And I said, I really didn't. And part of that was I was curious if she'd tell me. And I heard nothing about her day of visiting this new private school she may want to go to. And it was just so interesting. Not only was this book about a Shira, even though that wasn't this girl's real name, but I have a Shira. And my daughter obviously is not my little girl anymore and refuses to talk to me about anything. And so, but it also told me that I may not have to spend that tuition dollar because she didn't come home telling me all about it. So, anyway, So I enjoyed Sarah's presentation. It was just kind of funny as I was listening to it and hearing all these things going, I have that. So anyway, but of which I sometimes, and I probably won't today in this conversation, but a lot of times, sometimes I travel, and one of the things I do in my copious free time when I'm not taking care of clients is for about 20 days a year, I travel around the country and do continuing education for other CPA firms. So it's really kind of been interesting because this past year, while they tell you never to talk about religion in public, I'll talk about religion in public. So this past year, I always do this one trip every January. And I always miss my son's birthday because it's always January 10th. I'm always speaking in Tempe, Arizona. I've been doing it for 6 years on January, like whatever that week is, I'm always gone. And so this past year happened to be my son Max's bar mitzvah. And he looked at me, and his bar mitzvah was on the 10th. It was a Saturday of January 10th this year. And he said, Dad, at least I know for 1 year you're going to be here for my birthday. And so, but I have fun. So I have fun. Hopefully you guys will be somewhat entertained. Taxes by far are not interesting. I actually think I got the wrong order. I think I should have gone first because Sarah was a little bit uplifting. I'm going to be a little depressing. And, you know, and I just think that was the wrong order. You got to fix that next time when we're going to do some sort of update. So, interestingly enough, you know, the other thing I do at my firm, I do the tax update. Oh, by the way, my evaluations are horrible. My name's Steve Metzinen. If they're good, it's Jon Karp. Just so we're clear on that. Okay? All right. So if you don't like this, then it's Steve Metzinen. Otherwise, it's Jon Karp. Okay. So I've traveled around, and one of the things I do my internal education at the firm. So I do the tax update, the technical update for the firm every year for about an hour and a half, and I think really they just sleep through it. But this year I decided I put this up, and I said, who thinks this coming tax filing season will be miserable? Okay. Yeah, you did, right? So how many of you guys think it's going to be miserable this year? Yeah. So does anybody know, there's a guy's name out there. Does anybody know a guy by the name of John Koskinen? Well, you guys need to all remember this name. Because this guy has more to do with your life than you ever thought he did, and you didn't even know who he was. Okay? This guy happens to be the IRS commissioner. He's the guy at the top. Okay? And he's been quoted all over the newspapers and in Forbes magazine. This was right out of Forbes right here. He was quoted and he said, and this was actually not last month. I lied. We're in February. It was December. It was November's issue of Forbes. It just kind of tells you I picked up the same slide. I need to update that. The 2015 tax filing season will be one of the most complicated filing seasons we've ever had. All we can do is try to maximize our services as well as we can. As well as we can is still going to be miserable, and basically, you really get what you pay for. All right? Because if you paid attention, what?
What do you mean by that?
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about that. All right?
Budget cuts.
Absolutely, budget cuts. Okay? So here's what it is. He said, we have 5 reasons why it will be a miserable tax filing season. And I'll give you the 6th reason, by the way, that it wasn't his reason. But I'll give you the 6th reason out there, which may even have something, depending on where you are in the educational arena. If you're a CFO or if you're a teacher, like some of these will impact you greatly. One is recent spending package. The IRS usually got about $11 billion for 2015, right? So it reduced the budget by $346 million compared to 2014. So they cut their budget, right? So, and we'll see why that's really a problem. But I don't think it's a problem. Well, and you know what, it is my problem too. We'll kind of talk a little bit about that because one of the parts about cutting the budget is you may not be aware of this, but if you're a CPA and you have a public practice, what you get to do is you get to dial this special 1-800 number. And it used to be like this direct line to the IRS. And you know what? It used to call it. It was called the practitioner's hotline. And you would call that number and someone answered the phone. It was the greatest thing since they created the toaster or sliced bread machine or anything because it was wonderful. Right? Today, you can call your 1-800 number that you have in your tax notice, and I can call my 1-800 number. You may get through before I do. There's nothing special about the practitioner's hotline anymore. And why is that? It's because of budget cuts. So clients, when we're dealing with clients and complicated tax issues and just trying to get a simple answer, it makes it very difficult to get those simple answers because we're waiting on hold for 2-3 hours. I call it you know, when clients talk to me, I say, it's 1-800 call nowhere. Because then you're lucky if they just don't hang up on you by accident. And you start the whole thing for another 2 hours. All right, so it's not very much fun. All right. The other one is the Affordable Care Act. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about the Affordable Care Act because I think while some things have to do with what you do for a living, I think some of this will have a little bit about what you might do for a living, but some of this is also going to be what you're going to see personally this year. So this may be much more some personal stuff versus some company stuff. All right? But we're all of a sudden, this year is the introduction of some new stuff for us with the ACA. All right, the Affordable Care Act, we have the premium tax credit, right? And by the way, the government's great about premium. We'll talk more about that. I have a bunch of slides on that. The government's great about throwing these credits and these deductions, and then they leave it to people like me to tell a lot of my clients they don't get them anyway, right? So they get these people all pumped up that they have something new, like the whole health insurance credit. I had these clients. I had this one client who's a law firm, and I don't know how much you guys know about law firms, but their paralegals make more than 90% of the people in America. I mean, all these paralegals and a lot of the legal secretaries make $60,000 and $70,000. Well, if that's like your bottom level employee, besides the person who answers your phone as the receptionist, then you're not getting the healthcare tax credit. All right, so he was all up in arms saying that I must have done something wrong. Never mind that his W-2 was $3.5 million. But we get to exclude him for that compensation. Okay? So again, the government's great about giving people these credits. In fact, I'll tell you the other great one. If you think about it, everybody, all these insurance agents, is everybody an insurance agent in here? All right, good. Is anybody's, I also need to make a few generalized, make sure I know who I'm dealing with in this room. Is anybody's parents or you, I realize you guys are all in school business or you're in some sort of politics, but anybody like legislators, like religious legislators, people in Washington? Okay. All right. Just checking because one of the things what we'll talk about is when we talk about where we've been, you'll see why I asked that question. All right, just have to make sure I wasn't going to offend anybody. All right, and if I do offend you, I'll apologize now. And the other one is the individual shared responsibility payment. So here's, I want to see what our government's doing. They're saying, hey, look, we're going to give you this credit, which nobody's going to get, or a handful of people will get. We'll talk about who's going to get that. But then we're going to make you pay over here too. So you might get this credit, but you're probably going to pay some money depending on who you are. All right, my guess is a lot of people in this room aren't going to pay this money, but you could. You could. You know what? I was with someone in my office who I never thought would pay part of this money. And you know what she said? She said, we chose not to insure our children because they are healthy. And I was thinking about my children. I was thinking, are you kidding me? But all of a sudden, they're going to pay a penalty. All right? Third reason, this may or may not, hopefully you guys will have this problem because you're trying to shelter money abroad. But they have this whole idea of foreign income and foreign tax account tax compliance. So we have this whole new withholding requirement for foreign monies. Right? Well, so now we've cut the IRS's budget. Right? We're introducing all the Affordable Care Act stuff, and we have this new requirement, and we have less people to deal with it. All right? Then, of course, now we know Congress, thankfully, decided to vote during the lame duck session, and we got some tax extenders. But by delaying us into December, right, and delaying all of that, the first run of all the tax forms, and by the way, most 2014 tax forms were produced in the middle of the summer. You could go online if you kind of know how to find it and get the drafts. None of them had these tax extenders in it. They just had blank lines that said reserved. All right, and I'll show you kind of what that looked like. So now, all of a sudden, you've got all the software providers having to jump up and down to get their tax forms ready. Never mind the fact that when a client would call me in December, or never mind that, in June, and say, I've got these purchases, or in November, and we had to help them plan for capital acquisitions, we couldn't be helpful. So tax practitioners can't be helpful. The saddest part about this whole story is, guess what? If you called me this year and you said, hey, what should I do? All they did was change, they didn't give us a whole lot. They just changed the dates on the law. All right, we're still in the same place we were going into this December as we were this past 2 months ago. The IRS did Congress did us no favors, all right? And so I always say that I don't care if you're Republican, Libertarian, Democrat, it doesn't matter. If you think your guys in Washington and your females in Washington really care about you, they would get their act together and give us some legislation that would be able to help you plan. All they really, because if you think about it, you have to work 20 years if you're in most places to get a pension. Where else can you go get a gig for a couple of years and have lifetime benefits, have a lifetime pension, have all these great perks for a couple of years? It's a great deal. So they just want to stay there to accumulate those perks. That's my own opinion. So if you have friends that are congressmen, but make sure you knock on their door and tell them to like move it in the right direction so that people in business and people who we can help people plan. It makes it very difficult to do any type of tax planning when there's no tax law and legislation out there to plan with. All right? And if you think about it, passing something in December is too late. Right? For a lot of things, it's too late. There's no planning that can really be done. All right. So then the IRS came up and they said, we're going to also do this deal. We're going to have an implementation of a voluntary oversight program. So what does that mean? The practitioners can go in and say, we're going to be part of this program. So the IRS will be able to go in and look over our stuff, and who's going to manage that process? It's just kind of a crazy deal. Okay? And then what I tell you is number 6, okay, which is not on here, and depending on what you do for, like, I realize all of you are in education, but there's another new statute out there that has to do with all the capitalization regs in terms of how you capitalize equipment. So almost every tax return this year is going to have what's called a Form 3115 on it that's a business return. And so the IRS says, well, you know, maybe we didn't need to have everybody file that. Or maybe we did, but we're not sure, and more guidance to come. Well, gee, so what am I supposed to do? Right? We're filing them, and I promise you what's going to happen is no one's going to look at these things. So now you're my client that's a corporate client, and I'm charging you more for these forms that are pretty nice and detail-oriented for a 3115 because it's called the change of accounting method. And we're fine with almost all of our company clients. And it's just required. And so we're in this whole, but again, who's monitoring that process at the IRS? So they're going to have some serious service problems. And what you'll see more of, hopefully none of you in this room will get it, but what you'll see more of is what's called a correspondence audit. And what the correspondence audit is, they send you a letter, and they might put a phone number on that letter, but that correspondence audit means you just got to send them stuff. All right? And so one of the things that I really did, because it's kind of old, that I don't have in this presentation, but 1099s. Right? So the IRS came out and had these 1099-Ks, right? All the third-party providers have to send out. So one of my clients, and then they came out and said, we're not going to use those for anything. So one of my clients, believe it or not, they lied. Just so you know, the IRS lied. So it shouldn't surprise you too much. One of my clients is a chiropractor. He gets this letter in the mail, and it basically says, your third-party providers have said you've received X dollars from them. And according to our standards, whatever testing they've done out in the Metroplex or area of chiropractors, we think you are not reporting all your income because you have not reported enough cash receipts. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when was the last time you walked in and paid a doc $20 out of your pocket? Or how many of you guys write a check on a daily basis? Right? You put down your credit card, that's how you pay the doctor, which means over 90% of the dollars going into the physician is going to be third-party provider payments on a 1099-K. So they sent us this huge, it's called an IDR, an information document request, right? That we had to provide. And I thought this was the most ridiculous thing I'd ever seen in my life. Because one, they said they weren't going to use the 1099-Ks for anything. Two, is I wonder where they're getting their data from. I mean, the fact that you would get data that would say that people are paying it by check and by cash and not third-party payers means that your data's got to be 10 years old already for your research. Anyway, so long and short is we go through this whole compliance, this whole audit. I just want you to know, so I talked to an IRS agent I finally got through to someone. It took me 4 hours. 4 hours, okay? Finally get through to an agent, and I'm talking to this agent about this 1099, this correspondence audit. I said, do you understand what these guys do? I said, when was the last time, and I said this to the agent, I said, when was the last time you paid with cash? And she said, I never pay with cash. I said, then what's the purpose of this? And she went through and documented all this. And I said, you have to realize, in my office, we do everything for this doctor. I said, there's no more money. I said, I don't know what you think you're gonna find. And then I said, can I get an 8-week delay to prepare these documents? I said, you know, we moved our office, and I gave her this whole long song and dance to get the delay. She said, sure. 8 weeks goes by. I asked for another delay. I get it. Okay? All of a sudden, we get a letter in the mail. No lie. We have closed your audit with a no change audit. I never sent them a thing.
Just wait.
I just delayed it. Now, I'm not telling you to go do that, but I can tell you, my client thought I was a hero. He was like, man, that was awesome. I'm like, I really didn't do that much. I didn't have much to tell him. I didn't do anything. But in other words, not only did they not have enough staff, they closed the audit. Whether someone finally looked at it and said, hey, this is ridiculous, or not, I don't know. But they closed it and moved on. By the way, I think this client is targeted, by the way. I have a couple of clients who are like once in a lifetime clients. One was this client. Years ago, he got involved with some foreign income stuff, and if you don't report the right foreign income, you lose a lot of your money. Well, so he gets fined by millions, this is before I ever knew him, millions of dollars. He doesn't have millions of dollars. So, long and short is, by the time all the interest and penalties and wrapped up, he had a $10 million debt to the IRS, right? So I engaged an attorney buddy of mine. We got the IRS, now I can't guarantee if you guys have IRS problems, there's no promises on this. We got his IRS debt forgiven for $200,000, $10 million. That's a once in a lifetime. I don't think I'll ever be able to do that again. But he really hasn't. I mean, it's kind of an interesting thing. They just kept racking up the debt, and they realized he wasn't getting it, right? So you get, every practitioner will get that once in a lifetime event, and he was my once in a lifetime event. So, and he of course has been totally clean ever since I've been taking care of him.
So was that income too?
No, it was IRS debt. It's not income. It was interest and penalties. It was interest and penalties.
Forgiveness.
Nope. That's okay.
And you get it.
All right, so here's the other thing that I thought I'd show you up here. Is if you look at where we're going, and there's part of it is, remember, we're all filing electronically now. In fact, there's great penalties if you're not filing electronically. As a matter of fact, if you were one of our clients and we did your tax return and you didn't want to file electronically, I've got to get you to sign a waiver. And there's all these things I got to do now. So now, having said that, the IRS still is not up to date with their computer systems, which is a real problem, because we're talking about confidentiality. And you call the IRS, when I call the IRS and I say, hey, I need da-da-da-da, they say, well, do you have a power of attorney? I'll say, no, but I'll fax it to you. They say, great. And then they'll say, well, do you have a secure fax line? And let me be very clear to the IRS, a secure fax line is not a fax line that comes to your computer, right? It is a fax line that, if I had a fax machine here, that every one of you can go walk in and look at. I just want you to remember, so that is what's considered secure, but going to your email is not secure. That the likelihood of anybody else seeing your email, sure, there's a risk, but the likelihood of anybody else seeing your email is much less than the fact that you're going to go pick up the stack of faxes to see which one belongs to you and look at all this data. But that's more secure.
Right.
Okay? So just remember, but with that, right, the whole technology side, which is one of the reasons they're not having as much paper. So which may be why they're hitting their budgets, they don't need as much processing. What they're also trying to do is hire more talented people. Like for instance, depending on what type of business you had, they were trying to get people who just concentrated on those industries and those businesses so that they could be more targeted in their audits versus someone who knows a lot about anything. I mean, I can tell you the way I feel about the IRS. We fired some guy, not when I was a partner with it, when I was a partner with another firm. We fired this guy and he showed up and audited my client. He was one of my auditors. And I said, and actually, and here was the funny part, is people couldn't believe that I didn't request a new auditor. And I said, no, this is the best. And they said, why? I said, one is I know he's not very good. I said, the second reason is that when at the end of the day, if he's just really not reasonable, I can say he had an axe to grind and he should have recused himself before he walked through the door. And I know exactly what they want to see. So I was in a no-lose situation. All right, so, but if you look, you can see where the funding is. I mean, it just keeps going down, right? So you can kind of see, you can see where it was. So I think we'll see a lot more things happen at the IRS and the Revenue Service. And a lot more service issues. A lot more people, I can tell you when I have clients that call and say, my standard response when a client sends me a $100 notice, I say, you really want me to do this? I said, that $100 notice is going to cost you $250 to $500 for me to look at, to try and call them and get answers on. I said, just pay it, it's not worth it. And it's not because I don't want to find out what happened, it's there's just a value to everything. And it's not that I want to give the IRS $100 they don't deserve, but my client sure doesn't want to pay me to go really find out what it is. And they don't want to sit on the phone.
Hey, John, what's happening to the IRS is sort of parallel what's happened to the TPIA over the past decade. Is someone in the legislature, like someone in Congress, there's an action from the IRS, they start cutting. And where they start cutting is not from the collection aid side of it, but they cut from the helping side. Just like it's hard to find someone in the great people in the audit division, the finance division, but you can't get hold of them because you can, but there's not as many people that can help you out.
All right. So here's the other side, is you can kind of also see where we've come with tax acts, like just all the way through. So now you see we have the TIP Act, the Tax Increase Prevention Act, which was really all it was they just changed the date from 2013 to 2014. They just changed the date. That's all they did. They left everything else the same. All right. The only one thing sorry, I was ahead of myself. So here's the educator expenses. Well, know that that's back. And by the way, my wife was a school teacher, and I actually spent some time teaching in a private school. I know that, it's almost an embarrassment that they only give you $250 if you're an educator. I can tell you, my wife spent a lot more than $250 every year. All right. The tuition and fees, right? They just put reserve, that's back. So you can kind of see that go back in and retool all their forms. And then what happens is the software providers go back in, they got to retool their forms, and then they got to send it to the IRS. The IRS has to approve it, and then they get it back and they can put it into the programs. Most programs are up to date. We still have a couple of forms that we can't electronically file yet. A lot of them are state specific, not federal specific. But what happens is every year the IRS changes when we're allowed to send returns in. So you can have a client who's ready to go on January 10th. We can't even do it yet. No. The IRS isn't open for business yet. I think this year they opened for business on January 20th was when they first allowed their first electronically filed return. So you think about, right, people who finish the year and say, I'm ready, I'm going to get my refund, and I want it in the bank by February 1st. It's not happening. And every time they delay doing some acts, it just delays that process. Okay? And we, of course, get blamed for it as practitioners. All right. So here's just all the individual tax extenders, so you can kind of see, right, elementary and secondary. Here was the other thing. I love this one. All I know is, and if you did this, great. You don't have to raise your hand in this room. But to be able to buy a house in this country and then not be able to afford to keep the house, and I actually know someone who did this. I heard this story. What they did is they got out of their house because they were upside down. They got into another house that they were right side up, and they walked away from the mortgage on the first house. And what the IRS says is that is not taxable anymore. Isn't that great? Where else can you what a great country. You can and we wonder why we're in trouble. Anyway, so I know this, I've watched, rather than negotiate with the bank to get the debt and they just walked it, they bought a new house because they could qualify, and then they got the forgiveness of the principal debt and said, thanks, and it's right there, they were allowed to get it forgiven. So you would think they would do it for broke people, but no, anybody gets it, all right? They swapped a $500,000 house for a $500,000 house. But the $500,000 house was only worth $350,000. So they just swapped houses. They got it. All right. They did, mass transit, they did the mortgage insurance for qualified residents. I mean, there was basically anything that was there in 2013, they pushed into 2014. All right? But for us in Texas, like nobody else gets this perk. I mean, we love this right there, right? Because we get our sales tax. So we like that. People in other states, they don't understand that because they pay sales tax. So when I go to New York, like I was in New York, I was in Florida, and I always say, because I live in the great state of Texas where I don't pay income tax, right? So, because most of them will pay the income tax and not take the sales tax because their income tax is always higher. And this was one I just couldn't believe that was even a discussion. And by the way, there were several different plans. I mean, I'm not going over the different plans that were thrown out there between all the different congressmen about what they thought should happen. And then you had the House plan, you had plans that were going through the House and plans that were going through the Senate. And some of them were wanting to make certain types of these deals permanent, rather than just, every year they know, like, my guess is we'll see that elementary school teacher for the rest of our lives, but the question is, will they make it permanent? Or is it just something they're going to argue about every year? All right. Then obviously, you've got some business extenders, the research, right? The minimum housing, military housing, work opportunity, and those things. All right, and here's some more extenders. One of the biggest ones for most businesses that they all talked about was the Section 179 extender, that they just would not act upon that. And if you think about it, if you went and bought a big piece of equipment at the end of December, so here's the tax rule, by the way. The rule is, not only did you pay for it, but was it placed in service? So as a practitioner, what I've actually started doing is I'll say, hey, are you using it? Because I got hammered one year. When I say I got hammered, it wasn't an audit, I just felt like a really big dummy. Because what happened was I went into my client, she bought a new phone system. So I go in and I Section 179 the phone system, but I didn't ask her, did she have it installed or was she using it? And the answer was no. So then, right, whole year goes by, I get her next year's stuff. And what do I see on there? Looked into fixed assets, installation costs for a new phone system, January 15th. And I was thinking, oh my God. Right? Because the rule is it has to be in use. We don't tend to ask that question. I'm not sure if we really want to know the answer. But so when I say Congress doesn't act in time, it's because if you needed true physical assets, like true fixed assets that have to be, whether it's a piece of machinery or anything like that, that has to be shipped and installed, the last week of the year it's not happening, right? I mean, Lord knows where it's going to end up because of all the holiday shipping, all right? It's just not going to happen. That's assuming you can find the people who will come install it for you that week. So, anyways, you can see that they had a lot of different things go on the business extenders. And then, of course, all the energy extenders that they came up with. So if you want new windows in your house, you can go grab those and get the tax credit for that as well. All right. And then there's some thing for defined benefit plans that they came up with just as far as how to do that. They extended some of that as well. So now, what did they do that was new this year? All right, so it's really to talk about what they just left alone, or they extended for us. This is new. It's called the ABLE Act, right? Achieving a Better Life Experience. What they basically said was, and it's amazing. I just want to think, we were in 2014, okay? And they finally did something. So if you have a special needs child, we now have something that you can put away for them in a tax-deferred, right? Tax-deferred plan, a tax savings. Because up until now, if you had a special needs child, whatever you put away, you had to pay tax on it. There was no special, or if your special needs child, and I'm talking about an adult child at this point, if your special needs child, or when they were going to be an adult, right, had too much unearned income, they would lose all their benefits. Right? So therefore, you made sure that they never owned anything, or you never really had a plan for those children. And we wonder why we have problems in this country with people with special needs. In 2014, and they just fixed it. It's pretty scary, right? All right. So here's the other thing. And this is probably where I can go 5 minutes over, right? Since I start 5 minutes late. Okay. Well, and what you guys really have to know is I had 113 slides. I took out a stack like that as I said, because I was told originally I had an hour and a half. So I took out a stack, updated my presentation so that the people online didn't have any more than you got. They couldn't be clicking through stuff. So, so here's what they also, so the ACA Act, there's all these new with the filing of the 2014 returns during the 2015, right? We're gonna have to indicate, we're gonna have to look at our shared responsibility, and we're gonna say, do we have insurance or do we not have insurance coverage? All right, and I'll talk more about how difficult this is, even if as a practitioner, for me to have to get this information from my client. All right, because one, you can have an exemption, and then if you don't have an exemption, then we're going to have to look and say, how many months were you covered? So we use a pretty robust tax software, and if you were my client, you would get this pretty little organizer that had all your last year's information, and it had this year's information. And you know what it does? It says, did you have insurance? Did you have medical insurance last year? What are you going to answer me? Yes. All right. And guess what? If you got insurance in June, what are you going to answer me? Yes. Well, I just blew your whole tax return because I needed to know that you weren't insured for 6 months out of that year.
It should be no or partial. Right?
Thank you, software vendors. Right? So that's right. So now we got to call every one of our clients if we were at all curious, right? And say, hey, did you have insurance this year? Did you have it all year? What's your story? Okay. So obviously, there's taxpayers who can also purchase it through the healthcare insurance marketplace. What I think you'll find is if you purchase it through the healthcare marketplace, the older you are, the more affordable it is. The younger you are, the more expensive it is. So that's just the way it's kind of backwards, but that's the way, and by the way, I don't really know this for a fact, but that's what I've heard, and that's what I've read. Okay? So here's what's going to happen with these penalties, or this shared responsibility. And basically what they've said is if you don't have insurance, right, you're going to pay these penalties or these fines. They're non-deductible penalties, by the way. And you're going to pay this into the system to help offset some of these costs. All right? And if you see your 1040, it's going to be on lines 46, and I'll put up a little form up there that you'll be able to see here in a second. It's going to be on line 46 and 69 of your 1040. And then there's different forms that go along with that. Like one is the form 8962, and that's the premium tax credit. And we'll talk a little bit about what that is. And the other one is you're going to receive a form called the 1095A that you're going to have to use if you were to get that tax credit. You're going to have that information to report off of this 1095. All right. So again, now businesses and that's actually the 1095A will come from the marketplace. Okay. Line 61 is your penalty. And that, for there, you're going to look at your 1095B, your 1095C, and you'll see what those talk about. Did you have the right minimum coverage requirements? So now not only are we saying we're going to pay a penalty, we're actually going to say you don't have the right coverage. And we'll talk more about what that right coverage is. And then there's another form that adds to your return called the form 8695 that is the exemption. So what if you fall into a category of people or economics that you don't have to do any of this? You're going to file that form. So now, how many of you are willing to pay or prepare more money to prepare your taxes this year? Right. I didn't see a whole bunch of hands go up. All right. But it's going to be a little more complicated. Right? And it's more complicated, not to any fault of ours. Okay? So here's the way it looks. If you look at the forms up here, you can see right below the alternative minimum tax is the excess advanced premium tax credit payment. And by the way, when we talk about the premium tax credit payment, how many of you guys remember the home buyer's credit? Right, so there were two. Does everyone remember both of those? Right, there were two. Do you remember the differences between the two? Well, so that's the way this works too, by the way. So the advanced payment credit says, well, we're going to give you a credit on your tax return this year for your 2014 filing. But at the end of 2015, we're going to look and say, did you spend the right amount of money to absorb that credit? And if you didn't, then you have to pay us back. Yeah, that's going to go over really great, isn't it? So we're going to give you $1,000 or whatever it is, and then you're going to have to pay us back if it was really only $500. You're gonna have to give us 500 of that money back. All right? So it's gonna be interesting at the best. And then 61, your shared responsibility. And you know, so I processed, I'll admit I don't key in too many returns, but I was really curious how this was gonna work. So and really, my staff doesn't want me keying in returns because I used to think I was really great at computers. I really stink at computers these days. And so, I mean, I beta tested the Windows version of our tax software, but I'm telling you, the version I beta tested so many years ago doesn't look anything like what I beta tested. So I went in to test this just to kind of see how it would work. And I mean, I had a client who's already had to pay a few $100 of the shared responsibility tax credit, of the shared responsibility payment. So I was curious what it was going to look like. No, by the way, if you don't have insurance, heard this on the news, Sunday. So if you pay attention to our blog, I think I might blog this. This Sunday is the last day for open enrollment into the Obama healthcare plan for the healthcare exchange, unless you have a life-changing event, which is like you have a baby, change jobs, or you move, or several different things like that. All right. And then obviously your premium tax credit, and then obviously you have what you pay with the extension. So here's the other side, right? Remember, who has to do this? So it's under the Act. It's the federal government, state governments, insurers, employers, and individuals are all given the shared responsibility to reform and improve the availability. Which means this is everybody. So if you don't play by the rules, you're going to get hit with a penalty. All right. Not only that, what it also is if you look, it's all ages, including children. Okay. So you have to go into the return, and what defines the children is who's on that tax return. Who are you filing for exemptions and dependency exemptions? Okay, that's how that's defined. And so all of a sudden, we're modifying this whole process. Because I know a lot of people who, the mom and dad have one health insurance policy, like mom's insured over here, dad's insured over here, and the kids have something special. Well, now all of a sudden, we got to make sure what the kids have is a good policy. And it's the right kind of policy. Right? So when I grew up, my dad had like an 80-20 policy. And then I remember, if you think way back when, you had what was called just a disaster policy, so that you really don't worry about going to the doctor, but God forbid something really bad should happen, you want it to be covered in a catastrophic plan. Well, guess what? That doesn't count for this. So even though you may have a max out of pocket of 10 grand for a catastrophic plan, it may not be sufficient coverage for the health care. Now, we're not talking about HSAs and those things. We're just talking about a catastrophic plan. All right? All right, so qualified health plan, right? Taxpayer's family means anybody who can claim a deduction. I already said that. And then all people, right? So household income means the taxpayer's modified adjusted gross income plus all other individuals who are included in that household on the taxpayer's family. We'll talk about why that becomes important. All right? And what it means also, modified adjusted gross income, is all the things that are tax exempt, we're adding that back to your income. Right? So if you have exempt interest, you have foreign housing allowances, right? And here's the other part. You may not get that interest because if you have bonds, someone in here, I just caught in my earphone, I caught someone talking about bonds and bond interest. If you have accrued interest that you should get, that you have from a bond, that counts too. All right? Social Security benefits, whole 9 yards. All right, so what does it equal to? All right, the monthly penalty, which any failure of coverage occurred, is an amount equal to 1/12 of the greater of the following amounts. Right? I love their language, because if you can make sense out of this slide, you're doing pretty good. All right? An amount equal to the lesser of the sum of the applicable dollar amounts, which is $95 in 2014, $325 for 15, and $695 per, and this is per person thereafter. Okay? For all individuals that you don't have insurance. Or 300% of the applicable dollar amount for the calendar year, $285, $975, and $2,085. Or, remember, it's whatever's greater, 1% for 2014, 2% for 2015, and 2.5% in 2016, and that's of your modified adjusted gross income. And I'll go through an example of this so you can kind of see how this plays out. Okay? So let me just flip to these examples. All right, so wait. Sorry. If you look right here, what they do say is, well, what if you have a threshold? Like, what's that threshold? How do we define what your income should be? So they have these thresholds, so they say if you make over this, that's what the 1% is, and then in 2015, that's what the 2% is. So here's what those thresholds are. And then they say that we're going to give you a break for your kids. And so your kids are only 50% of what the adult is. And then they talk about what the national average, the premium average is, and it just goes up. And we'll talk, and we'll show you what those are. And it's $2,048 for this year. All right. So here's the thresholds. So it's if you're single, married, filing jointly. So if you made $100,000, it'd be $100,000 minus $20,300, and that would be the amount that would be subject to penalty for your income, the 1%. Okay. All right. So here's an example. Jesse is unmarried, no dependents, does not have minimum essential coverage for all of 2014, and does not qualify for the exemption. His household income is $40,000, right? So if you remember that slide, the threshold was $10,150. Okay. The formula requires the greater of $298.50, calculates 1% of household income that is above the tax return threshold, or 95, the flat dollar amount. National average, I said 2048, it's 2,448. The national average in 2014 is $24.48 because $298.50 is greater than $95 and is less than $2,448. His shared responsibility payment is going to be $298.50 or $24.87 for each month. All right, and that he would have to pay that in as part of his return, or it would reduce the amount of refund he would have otherwise received.
So the $95 is deceiving.
It's very deceiving. And you'll see that in this next example, the second part of this next example.
If you pay that 95, right?
Well, maybe. Depends on where your income is.
I know, but
It is. I mean, it's a calculation. Be glad if you have a software. I mean, I have checked. The software does do it. So if some of you do tax returns for people, just make sure your software is doing it. I would make sure that you do one by hand and do it longhand to make sure it comes out. TurboTax makes mistakes. Every tax software, even our tax software, makes mistakes. You know, it's as good as the people putting in the formulas. You should hopefully they get them, right? They get it right. But especially on new stuff, you always want to check it. All right. So Walt and Skylar are married. And by the way, you have to know, I really hadn't, when I first got told this example from this book, I had no idea who Walt and Skylar was. I live in a shell. Do you guys know who they are? You guys are, they're the characters from Breaking Bad. That's about all I know about them, by the way. Okay. Walt and Skylar are married. They have 2 children under 18. They do not have minimum essential coverage for any month during 2014. And no one in the family qualifies for an exemption for 2014. Their household income is $70,000. $20,300 is their threshold. And the formula requires the greater of $497, calculated as 1% of the income that's above the tax return filing, $70,000 minus $20,300, $285, $95 per adult, $47.50 per child. The family's annual national average premium for bronze level coverage is $97.92, right? $2,448 times 4. Because $497 is greater than $285 and is less than $97.92, right? Walt and Skylar's shared responsibility payment is $497, right? $41.41. Okay, so they'll do that. All right, so now what do we do with their taxes in April? Now here's where you really see where this kicks in.
Can you go back to that previous slide? Where are you getting these annual national average premiums?
It's a published number.
Oh.
It's a published number. The government said that the bronze level coverage is $2,448 per person. That's it. Next year it'll be something different. Okay? So that's a good question, by the way. All right, so now let's assume the same fact, except that Walt has gambling weddings, which actually after Powerball the other day, this is a great one to have, right? Which increases their income to $1 million. So the formula requires the greater of $9,797, calculated as 1% of household income that is above the tax return filing threshold. $285, the flat dollar amount, so obviously we know it's going to be $97.97, it's the greater of. But what I brushed over very quickly, and I'll now bring it back in, is you do have a cap, okay? So the cap is that bronze level package times 4. So because so the family's annual national average premium is $97.92. That's the most they would ever have to pay So because 97 is greater than 285 and also greater than 97, 92, their shared responsibility is capped at 97, 92 for 2014, or $860 per month. So now you can kind of see, if you have a high wage earner, it's not cheap anymore. And remember, this is not deductible. This is a penalty. You don't get a deductible on your tax return. Yep, yep. So here's the form, the 8965, okay? And you can see that they also have these great things. And I probably should have brought you an example. I'm embarrassed. Well, I'll wait for that slide. So if you look here, you can have a hardship down here, or you can have what's called an exemption, right? And so here's all the things that gives you that the exemption from filling out that 8965. One is you're homeless, right? So I think the idea was to try and figure out how to get the homeless covered. Well, we haven't accomplished that very much with this act. And by the way, I think there's some great parts about the Affordable Care Act. And I think there's some really bad parts about the Affordable Care Act. It would be nice if they would figure out how to keep the good parts and get rid of the bad parts.
Maybe you could just convince your spouse to beach.
There you go. Oh, but I'm embarrassed to tell you that maybe it was about a week and a half ago, and I'm you think, okay, this guy's an accountant and pays attention to everything. Not really. So mail comes in, I don't even look at half my mail, or I flip through it really fast. Well, all of a sudden, on our water bill, I saw this final notice. I'm like, right? I'm like, I don't ever pay the water bill. And like most people, we have an auto paid on the credit card. Well, duh, they changed all of our credit cards because Citibank loves to do that to you about every 6 months. And we just forgot that the water bill was on that credit card. And during the summer, your water bill is 100 and change, but in the fall when it's not hot out, it's like $40. I mean, do you think I really missed $40 on my credit card? Not really. You always know what's there that's not supposed to be there, but you really don't know what's missing, right? And it was really on my wife's credit card anyway. And so it was really her fault. But and so, well, I got a shutoff notice from my utility company, which means I'm exempt if I have to pay that penalty. Because I have the photocopy that says if you don't pay it by this date, we're cutting off your water. Well, that's a shutoff notice, right? All right, so for $5 extra, I paid my bill and got my water to stay on. But I mean, and then of course, like most absent-minded people, you think I knew what her password was? That was another interesting part, because it's her name and her password. I mean, it's my name on the bill, but her name on everything else. All right? That was great trying to call the water company and explain how. So here's all the reasons. But if you look, it's filed bankruptcy. It's, if you had experienced a hardship obtaining health insurance, existing individual insurance plan was canceled. There's one that you had. So like even right now, experienced for disabled aging. I have actually right now, it's really interesting, and we'll see how this plays out. But I have a client right now that, it's a horrible situation actually, but the wife has been in the hospital probably now going on 6 weeks. She took care of everything. He has no idea where anything is. So even for their business, he has no idea. So I said, look, we'll figure it out. Not that we figured it out yet, but he has missed every filing deadline there is to miss so far. All right? I think I have a good cause. I mean, we filed stuff late, we haven't had any notices yet. And she had strokes, just horrible stuff that nobody should ever, and not an old person either, a young woman. And, but just plagued with all of a sudden, boom, they don't know when she's gonna get out. And so he said, John, how am I going to do this? I said, we'll figure it out. I said, if the worst thing that happens, we'll file things wrong and we'll change them and we'll figure it out. But it's very interesting. They called me, and she called me. She was as loopy as could get out because she was worried about filing her 1099s. She was in the ICU and she made her husband call me. I was thinking, are you for real? So you just worry about getting better. And we'll figure out your 1099 problem. All right.
Death? What does that mean, death for close family?
I don't know, my dog died. Is that good enough?
Yeah.
No, it totally was up. Totally was up.
Isn't that?
Totally was up. It's really kind of I laughed when I saw this because I was thinking they spent all this time trying to tell us how they wanted us to do this. And I guarantee you, if I went around this room, one of you could find one of these that might fit you. All right, even, I mean, where's one of them? I don't know, you know what, had medical expenses you couldn't pay in the last 24 months? I'll tell you what's really interesting, because they don't tell you how that really works. But you know, my kid was sick, I mean, my kid is now 7. When he was 3.5, he had his tonsils taken out. You know, like 2.5 weeks later, when you think you're fine, just fine, he starts bleeding internally from his tonsils. Yeah, it's horrible. All right, I just got a bill. He's 7. He just had his 7th birthday. Good Lord is right. I'm not paying it, but maybe that counts too. I mean, I wrote him a letter and I said, you know, I'd love to pay you, but I want every single detail about this bill. And I haven't heard anything since. I mean, and it may be right, I don't know. Listen, he had emergency surgery. I mean, I would have paid my way, but it sure would have been nice to have gotten the bill like 3 years ago. What it really says is I need to be that guy's accountant and like refurbish their offices. Okay. Premium tax credit. Again, we kind of talked about that. Just know that it's health insurance marketplace. It's the exchange. Again, you want to go and get that if you need it. Choosing whether the credit paid in advance. Know that you're going to have to reconcile that at the end of the year. Individual is eligible to get the tax credit if she meets all the following requirements. He or she, right? Purchased coverage through the marketplace, meaning you're not part of another plan. You've got household income that falls within a certain range. We'll talk about that in just a second. It's down below if you read down the slide. It's not able to get affordable coverage through an eligible employer plan that provides minimum coverage values. It's not eligible for coverage through any type of government coverage. So now, I mean, now if you go back to the beginning when we talked about the ABLE Act, I want you to think about these people who got closed out of insurance because they had too much unearned income, if they had parents that put away for them because they were special needs. So, then we finally just fixed that, all right? We're not good about fixing things. There's some other things I could tell you about fixing stuff that would blow your mind considering where we are today. File a joint return if you're married. So if you file married, filing separately, this doesn't work for you. It's not claimed by a dependent. It's not claimed by a dependent of any other person. All right. This happens all the time, by the way, all the time in divorced couples. People is the first to file, regardless of who's supposed to take them. It's the first to file, and then you got to argue, right? So in general, families whose income is between 100% and 400% of the federal poverty line can be eligible, and here's that guideline. Again, these are published statistical numbers. The government publishes these to tell you what they are. All right, this is not something that Jon Karp put together on his Excel spreadsheet. Okay? All right, here's the form of what it's going to look like. We're not going to go through a whole lot of that. 1095A, this is what you would need to fill it out. You get this form. Okay?
Who's going to get that form?
What?
Who's going to get that form?
If you get insurance through the marketplace,
through the marketplace,
you're going to get that form.
But
And you'll need that to file the 8962.
So if you don't go through the marketplace, you're not going to get that form.
Well, you might get something else.
Next year, isn't it?
Well, see, that's really the interesting part, by the way.
That's why it's-
Give me your name.
My name?
Yeah, because you've just been very participatory, so I'm not going to get your name.
I don't know what she said the real name.
All right, so we'll call her Betty. So Betty, okay. So Betty's right. So here's, I just want you to think about what.
Betty was right?
So Betty said that we got to get the form. We're not going to, so here's the joke about all of this compliance that's upon us. So I got to call you and say, do you have insurance? Your employer or your insurance company is not required to give you these forms yet. Now they said they can be voluntarily, that's a hard word to say, voluntarily compliant and adopt this early because they were supposed to do it this year. What they've said is they now don't have to do it until 2015. But wait, I got to know the information from you for your 2014 return, but your employer or your insurance company is not required to give it to you in writing. Well, how am I ever going to get an accurate tax return file? I just better trust you when I say, were you insured all year? And you say yes.
Well, no, you asked the question, were you insured, and you prayed that they were. That's what you had to do.
Yeah, I mean, you know, but you know, the real issue though, you would think that in the clients that a firm like ours represents, that you would have, every one of your clients would have health insurance. That's not the case. A lot of them that are, I mean, I literally looked at a W-2 that had $70 million. Now he does have health insurance, but someone who makes that type of money could just have a catastrophic plan because he or she will write a check for anything they need. They just want to make sure, God forbid, if they have, they have cancer coverage, something that would just kill their money. but that's not covered under the HCA policy, under the ACA. So you would think, right, that people who have means would be insured and would have the right insurance. It's not necessarily the case. I have a lot of clients that were scrambling trying to figure out to make sure their insurance qualified.
So getting back to the question about the 1095, the 1095A for 14 is only through the exchange?
Well, that's the A. There's 1095 Bs and Cs, so we're gonna get to the other one real quick. Then I think I'm gonna have to let you guys go. Because.
Next year, all employers.
Where is it?
Put them out.
There's your 1095B, okay? This is minimum essential, right?
Correct.
Okay, so that is right there. Okay, and you're gonna get that for health coverage. All right, now here's the other side. If you are part of a self-insured program, so your employer is not necessarily gonna give this to you if you if you have Blue Cross Blue Shield. Blue Cross Blue Shield should be sending it to you. If your employer is part of a self-insured, your employer may be sending you a 1095C. So the answer is you're going to get one of these forms. And then if your employer really doesn't know what they're supposed to do, you'll get the 1095B and the 1095C.
Or nothing.
Or nothing. And this year, and you could get something this year. I mean, I had a client get something this year.
From an employer?
From an employer.
Oh, my.
So you just don't know.
I thought it was only marketplace.
Well, no, that's where you're going to get it from the marketplace.
For sure, for sure.
For sure, for sure. But the employers could adopt early. So if they had already tooled their systems to get this data, they did a practice run.
You've only had one?
I only have one. All right.
When is that effective?
That's effective 2015. So my guess is in about November of 2014, employers who have not yet been looking at this issue, no, I'm sorry, 2015, sorry. I'm a year behind in my life. I'm trying to forget how old I am. So in 2015, maybe sooner than that, what you'll have is payroll. If you do internal payroll, you'll be getting some system tweaks to take care of this. Otherwise, if it's like an ADP, they'll be coming up to talk to you saying, how are you going to prepare these forms? And they're going to want more money from you to prepare them.
You're saying that school districts are, which are quite often self-funded, will be providing these to our employees.
You got it. Yep.
How does this all relate to this box on the W-2 that we've been reporting? Anything?
Nope.
Nothing.
Nope. And I'll tell you why I'm saying no. One is just sheer dollars that you're throwing in an insurance plan. Now you have to go back and say, is this one of the qualified insurance plans? Right? So at the end of the, right, now, 99.9% of the time when you're looking at self-insurance and this stuff, it's going to be the right insurance plan. I mean, you may have one or two that aren't. I mean, the reality is if you're working for a district or a city or, right, they've got the right plan.
So what's the IRS doing with that box?
Double D?
Yes.
It'll still work without it.
I don't know. The answer is I really have no idea. If I wanted to go back historically, all right, so if sole proprietors and people who were in the small business world of S corporations were not allowed to deduct health insurance premiums. All right, if you were in a C corporation or a big business, you could deduct health insurance premiums all day long. So if I said, what are they going to do with it? We could see some sort of, I mean, this is Jon Karp pontificating. You could see some sort of sliding scale of taxable fringe benefits, maybe. Saying, you know what, there's a taxable fringe benefit of health insurance.
I thought that they were trying to make you aware of what your employer pays on your behalf.
You know what, I give you a pretty little Excel spreadsheet that tells you that it's your benefit package. Here's what your package is worth. This is everything we pay for you.
As your preparer would go through your tax return, you'd say, did you know that they spent $10,000?
Oh yeah, I do that way before. All right. Just know that there are a lot of people that are not happy about this. There's still lawsuits. There are people who say it's unconstitutional. I pay attention to the news. I do think it's here to stay. I think it's once you have something passed into law, it's very hard to get rid of it. But it would be nice if they would fix it. Okay. And again, you know, if you look, it can be up to $36,500 per year per employee that you can have. All right, I have a lot more slides, but I know there's another presenter. And in the essence of time, you guys have been a great audience. I'm going to flip all the way to the back and undo it, go all the way to the last slide, which you get my contact information, and you see something else in the slide presentation. Like I said, I had really planned for an hour and a half, so I had to figure out what to cut. You can always, the best thing to do is go into a room where you have too much stuff and not enough stuff. I'll hang around for a couple minutes if you have any questions, and then I'll get you my contact info here at the end here. Maybe. There you go.
Excuse me, can I ask one question? So I
Absolutely.
guess essentially, if you're the preparer of returns, you're more the medical Nazi, aren't you? Instead of preparing the returns.
It's really good that you said you're a Jewish guy who's been 17. No, you're fine, you're fine.
I didn't mean that.
I'm just kidding, I'm just kidding. I have a pretty good sense of humor, you're fine. You know what you really have, what they've really done is they've taken...
You're agreeing with me.
No, I'm totally agreeing with you. And what they've really done, furthermore, so if you go back when I first started preparing tax work, 20 plus years ago, if you came to me and you said, hey John, I really want to do this on my tax return, I could say to you, okay, that's great. I could give you this, I'd say, you're going to write this letter of indemnification, because when the IRS comes chasing you, I don't want you coming to chase me.
Disclaimer.
Right, no, indemnification. Not disclaimer.
I didn't lie to you, and you didn't lie to me.
That's right. Today, what's different about today is today what we have is what's called preparer penalties. And so if you ask me to take a position that I already know is wrong, I'm going to be right in there paying penalties with you. And not only that, in Texas, I don't know if they've changed this, but when it first came out with preparer penalties, they actually said, we're going to report it to the state board. Well, I don't know about you, but when I passed my exam so many years ago, can't pass again, or cut the paste artist, whatever it is. One of the first, when I started getting that quarterly newsletter, the one thing I wanted was never to be on the back of it. Right? I want to be in it somewhere one day, maybe, but not on the back of it. All right?
I have a general question about tax preparation software, whether it's the professional version or TurboTax.
Okay.
How do I know there's not information that I've added as I've prepared my taxes that the IRS is going to get their hands on that they really are not entitled to have? I mean, because you enter a lot of detail to prepare your taxes. If you send them in on paper, they're only getting what they're required to get, but how do I know they're not getting more?
They're getting all of it. You realize any line item that's a data byte inside, well, let me rephrase that. I won't say that necessarily. Any line item that actually is on the return, so if you can get a transcript of your return, which is just line item detail. So even though a white paper statement in your tax software may say you gave goodwill several times, they may only have one number depending on how you reported it. And that's the way they get the data. It's all data bytes. But if it shows up on a line on that tax return, it is data mineable to the IRS. So anything that's not on the line, generally speaking, the software vendor's not sending it. Okay, because it doesn't need to send it. But realize that when you type in all those banks, it's going. And you actually want to give the IRS information because what happens is, I'll just give you the example. So my dad, of course, this only happened to CPA's dad, and I prepare his tax return. He gets his IRS notice for $33,000 that he owes in tax. Yeah. Of course, calls me up and he says, John, I think we have a problem. And he said, let me be very clear. And what the reason was is because the IRS misread a reported 1099. And the 1099 was for $990, and they didn't see the little decimal point, and they logged it in as $99,000. And my dad said, I paid them $33,000 if I really made $99,000, but I clearly didn't make $99,000. And I was able to show the IRS, not only that, did we get a copy of the 1099, and we blew it up real big, where they could see the little dot, but I also showed them where we listed that income provider, and I put $990. And it was right there on the face of his return in a statement in the back. And that they clearly should have seen that even on the 1090, this is where you wonder who's doing what. Because on the 1096, I promise you, the provider of the 1099 didn't say $99,000. So sometimes more information is good.
Moving along to the next presenter, and we'll catch up on time and try to stay within the time, about 45-ish.
I'm rushing.
Don't have to rush it. Our next speaker, he's been in some of our ethics classes, and he asked him. I guess he took several courses, and one of those courses he had to do a presentation on code of ethics, and I thought that it was an excellent presentation, one of the better ones that I have seen, and he has done some professional speaking, and he has a company. He'll talk to you about that, and other than a colleague and friend, he's been my student before, so let me introduce you to Jaime Martinez.
One time I came out to give a presentation and I said, Dios te bendiga, hermano. And they were like, what? I was so in the zone, I was so ready for my presentation. And he was talking about, being bilingual. So if I ask you, who understood what I said? Raise your hand. Nobody? One? Only two? Let's say it again. Dios te bendiga, hermano.
What did you say?
God bless you, brother. God bless you, brother.
I have an interpreter.
Good. So, I was born and raised in Colombia. I came to the States at the tender age of 35. And we moved here because of guerrilla threats and, bad things that were going on in our country at the time. And we started all the immigration process, and thanks to God, now we're citizens. So I'm very blessed to be an American. So in the process of getting into the culture, and I finished accounting in my country, and I'm certified in Colombia, but I needed to apply for the CPA in the States, so I went through all the process, and they said you need to take some classes, and that's how I ended up as a student with Dr. Ernesto. And in one of the classes was an ethics class. So he said you need to write a code of conduct, like for your company. And I did try to write something for a company, but it was not easy. We have a 23-year-old son, and I kind of kept him in my mind. So when I was writing the code of conduct, I had my son in mind. So at the end, I decided, more for society, code of conduct in society. So the first one here is place God on top of your priorities. Make Him or recognize Him as your Creator, as your Father, as your Savior, as a helping hand ready to rescue. Recognize Him as provider. We're living in a society that is trying to move God to the side. And it's always a concern when you talk about this, especially in public schools. It's like, you cannot mention God. We should. We should. I don't know if any of you have read this book, but I came across this book called And Protected. And this is a psychiatrist that wrote a book about how society is just ready to protect everybody except good, moral, Christian, Jew, Muslim people. People who really believe in God. So that's the first thing. If we put man in God's position, we're going to fail. That's our country. In God we trust. So I guess nobody talks about this, and We need to start doing it. Do not harm. Each behavior should be oriented towards not causing harm to others or yourself. And when we do something that is wrong, then forgiveness. I heard somebody saying, you want to have one day of happiness? Revenge. You want to have a peaceful life? Forgive. Forgive yourself. Forgive your family. Forgive your friend. Forgive your enemy. Forgiveness. Easy to say, hard to practice. Especially with oneself. We blame ourselves for things we've done in the past, and we carry that. Something we need to get loose. Search for goodness. Remember, this is for my son, but this is for society, right? Search for goodness. Everyone should try his or her best to behave in a way that will bring goodness around. You need to affect your environment so that it brings goodness out of people. Love should be the catalyst of relationships. And if you do one good thing per day, and one good thing could be just a smile. Somebody strange in the street, just smile. At school, these kids, if somebody drops a book, just okay, help them. If you see a kid that is around there by himself, you see somebody crying, what do? We always turn to the other side. We need to be good with people around us. As if they were from our family, right? Good company. Find your friends. Count your friends, not your acquaintance. A good friend should help bring the best attributes of you. You should be an aid to bring the best out of your friends. You have a friend? Test him. When I talk to young people and they're in this boyfriend-girlfriend relationship, I advise them to fight, argue. You need to see what happens. People get into marriage and they don't know what is to see the other one mad. Test your friend. Test your girlfriend. See what happens. Loyalty and fidelity adorn friendship. Respect your friends. Friendship. My father used to say that we normally look up. We try to see where we're going, what we can do, the things we can accomplish, but we never look down. We never look down. We are getting in America into a culture in which they talk about you and I'm sorry. They talk about them and us. Our president is talking about the rich people and we the poor ones. Do you know that most of the population in the world makes less than $10,000 a year? So we here, when we talk about how much we're making, I'm not asking, but if we are above 40,000 a year, we're probably in the 5% of the total population in the world. So we are the rich ones. And that's not what our culture is supposed to be. We're supposed to embrace. We are supposed to be in the country where this is the land of opportunities. Who wants to make $1 million? I do. This is the place. So why would we start just pointing the rich? They need to pay more taxes. Why? We need to pay fair taxes. We are all the same bunch. So look up, yes, let's aim high. Look up trying to get the best of life for you and your family. Yeah, let's make money. Let's be happy. Let's look up. But also look down to see what other people go through life under severe circumstances. People without running water, no AC. Let's not complain. It's so easy to talk about the things that we don't have. Count your blessings. We have lots of things to be grateful about. Aim high, gain lots, and share. Share with the needy. And here I always talk about tithing. It's so important to tithe. When people tell me, I pay, tithing is too much, 10% is too much. I said, well, easy. Ask God to give you less money so you tithe less. How about that? Or the opposite. Ask Him to give you more so you can tithe more. Truth. Do not lie. And that includes do not exaggerate. Do not minimize. Be accurate. We were talking about writing, and I said facts. We need to speak facts, not opinions. It's so easy to judge. Be accurate. Listen more, talk less. Own your silence and do not be slave of your own words. We used to live in a world in which a handshake was just enough. Not anymore. Contracts, documents, lawyers, laws. But we can live a life in which our word is a contract, in which we live to what we say. Joy, be happy. We were making this presentation for kids in Laredo, and I told the kids, you want to know a secret about girls? Yes. Make them laugh. You want to get girls' affection? Just, be happy around her. Make them laugh. Don't you like going home and finding if you're married, a husband that makes you laugh? Your boyfriend makes you laugh? That's important. Be happy. Laugh often. Make jokes, but on yourself. Do not make jokes on others. Maybe they will take it the wrong way. We don't know. Words may cause harm, and we already went through that. Do not cause harm. Do not be so serious. Relax. See the beauty in everything. That's being joyful. Finding joy in the weather. Finding joy in the colors. In the smells. When we eat the food, have you noticed lately? At least my son is like, hey, slow down. Just take the flavor of the food. Everything we have received to be enjoyed. All this creation is for us to enjoy. Every little moment. We need to squeeze it. Judgment. Do not judge others. Allow others to be. Let others make mistakes and correct them. Don't we learn from mistakes? So we need to make room, especially for our kids, to make mistakes. And then realize what's going on and then correct. Be patient. It is so hard to live under somebody else's circumstances. There is a saying in Spanish, it says something like, Nobody knows what kind of thirst has the one drinking water. We don't know what circumstances that other person is going through. We only recognize that she or he mistreated me this morning, and I'm so pissed off. Man, we don't know if the poor guy didn't have breakfast. Maybe he couldn't sleep at home. We don't know. So, if we don't judge, we live a better life. Understanding the other, giving room to the other. For men, this is for my son, remember. See a woman as a mother, as a sister, and as a friend before you see her as your mate. Every woman is somebody's daughter. So I asked the students the other day, close your eyes and just think about that you have a son. How much would you love that son? How much would you protect him? How much you would love him? And then make her a daughter. It makes it worse. We only had a son. I don't know what I would have done with a daughter. Our friend was saying that he has 5. Would you expect your daughter to be treated well? Would you expect your daughter to be appreciated? So before starting mating, we need to start seeing that woman as a mother, the mother of your children, as your friend, as your sister. When I was little, I had 2 sisters. And I was waiting for my wedding to start my sexual life. I could not understand how people would do things to my sister in the eventual case that I could do to somebody else. So I was always respectful. I didn't want to harm anyone. Her mistakes do not authorize me to use her. I cannot push anybody down into the bottom because things have happened. Love your woman with all your heart and you will never need another one. Well, I found mine. And I tell you, I just need her. I can have everything I need in her. You don't need more than one, for sure. Always say thanks. Always thank God for what you have, including your problems. Our problems are opportunities to find the right way. We learn more from our troubled times than what we learn from our happy times. Always remember those who help you. Be content with what you have. Prayer. Am I going too fast? Prayer. Pray often. Pray to God personally and in community. Accompany your prayer with service. I don't know how many Catholics here, I'm not going to ask. But we have some things that we call sacraments. At the end of your life, as Catholics, we understand that we have two options. We go into marriage, or we go into the order, which is being a priest or being a nun. And both sacraments are sacraments of service. So when we are married, we are supposed to service our wife, our husband. But we need to go beyond that. Not just serve at home, but do some other service where we can put in practice all what we learn about while praying. Get your own Bible. Read your Bible. Read your Bible. They say that a dirty Bible is a sign of a clean Christian or a clean religious person, while a clean Bible is just a dirty religious person. Use it. Get your own. Write on it. Mark it. Highlight it. Did you hear the guy doing the presentation before me? Regulations, 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 norms, laws. They keep on giving us instructions on how to do things. Even they're coming into telling us how we need to insure our people and what we're supposed to do. Jesus Christ. They didn't learn anything from God when He only gave us 10. Remember, kids? Keep it simple. So let's comply with them. Language. We had a presentation here about language. Beautiful. Do you know how many words the English language has? I'm sorry, Sara left. She should know. Maybe like 15,000 words, something like that. You know how many you and I use? They say that we normally use like 2,000, 1,000. So our language is so rich and so wide, and it has so many inflections and words and tenses and all these other ways to express ourselves. And we end up using curse words. When I was talking to the kids, I was telling them the amount of words that you use is a sign of intelligence. So you want to show your classmates or your friends that you're smart? Use different words. Don't stay with the same words. Insults, bad words. How about those who speak more than one language? I heard 1, 2, 3. We need to respect people who speak more than one language. It is hard for us to get into that tricking. And I have seen people that were not able to learn a second language. One of them is the vice president of treasury for this major oil and gas company. He had teachers as many as he wanted. He never went further from Joe soy, Joe soy, Joe soy, Joe soy. I am. So is equality is something special, is something important. And you know, just the effort to try to communicate in a different language. We Hispanics, we got it easy. We have the same alphabet. How about these other guys that come from writing of all these signs and, you know, drawings? So we need to make an effort to understand others. So this presentation was about a code of conduct for your company. So which of these items would you include there? And then the following question is, what is more powerful? How you behave, or what the code says? Are you the kind of people that gets home and everybody has to go scared? Are you the kind of people that goes into the office and everybody has to go silent? Boss is here. How are we affecting people around us? So I guess the thing today is what do I need to change? You know, when you point the finger to somebody else, there are 4 fingers pointing to you. 4 fingers. I guess I went too fast. Take an ethics class. It's important to be reviewing things and shaking the tree and question what we're doing wrong. So thank you very much. I can just say God bless you, and I try to rush that we get into schedule. And so thank you very much. Any questions? I wrote a book about, it's called La Libertad de Saber, Freedom of Knowing. It's in Spanish, and it is about spiritual warfare. So I take really serious the religious part. I'm a senior director of an organization that gathers people to pray in Spanish every Monday. Very committed to spreading the good news. So this book is about a big conflict that is around, in which we only see the wounded. We see people immersed in drugs, alcohol, all sorts of addictions, and they don't know how to get free. And this is about that, how to be free, how to recognize that there is God, there is an angel that decided to go wrong, and then down there, less powerful, we as creatures. Spiritual warfare is how this little creature here, relying on God, is able to defeat the angel. That's what it is about. And I work as a headhunter, another way of helping people, and also as a motivational speaker. So, thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much. It's always a pleasure to be here and to see so many familiar faces in the room. And I'm sure to see a bunch of you also next week at the TASMO conference. And so let's get started with the TPIA. As Jesus said, even if you don't directly deal with the Texas Public Information Act, meaning you're not the public information officer, it's not your day-to-day job to deal with open records requests. Lots of open records requests deal with financial information and purchasing information. And so no doubt you should at least be aware of the basic requirements of the TPIA. The TPIA applies not only to independent school districts and other governmental entities, but to charter schools as well. We know that charters are opted out of quite a bit of the laws that do apply to ISDs, but this is one that does apply to all of us. So what are the basics? The TPIA, the Texas Public Information Act, gives the public the right of access which is either copies or inspection to government information. It's housed in Texas Government Code Chapter 552, and non-compliance can result in both civil and criminal penalties. So it's a big deal. The definition of public information is incredibly broad. It's always been broad, but the legislature, the past legislative session made it even broader. The portion of the print that is bold and in italics, the written or produced, is new as of last legislative session. So all information that is written or produced, collected, assembled, or maintained under a law or ordinance, or in connection with a transaction of official business by or for a governmental body is subject to the TPIA and, importantly, is presumed to be public unless it falls within one of the 50+ very specific exceptions to disclosure. Information that's written, produced, collected, assembled, or maintained by an individual officer or employee in the officer or employee's official capacity and information pertains to official business of the governmental body is presumed to be public information. What does official business mean? Thankfully, they have provided a definition, again, a very broad one. Official business is defined as any matter over which a governmental body has any authority, administrative duties, or advisory duties. Information is considered to be in connection with official business if it's created by, transmitted to, received by, or maintained by an officer or employee of the governmental body in his or her official capacity, or a person or entity performing official business or a governmental function on behalf of a governmental body. And again, it must relate to and pertain to official business of the governmental body, which in this case is the school district. Public information, when we think about public information, we automatically think of records. We think of paper. But it includes much, much more than that, especially in the digital age that we live in today. Pursuant to the statute, public information includes information that's maintained on paper, on tape, on microfilm, if anybody uses that anymore, on video, and electronic data held in a computer memory, and many other forms of media. Only a written request, and that includes email requests and fax requests, triggers the Act's requirements. So if somebody calls and says, I want copies of the contract awarded last week by the board pursuant to RFP XYZ, that technically is not a public information act. Can you send it to them? Sure, just because you're a nice person. Are you required to? No. In some districts, most districts want to be able to track their public information requests, and so want those to come through in writing. A request is not required to be on any specific format or a charter or district provided form. Many districts choose to have a link on their website where somebody can just click and either an email address comes up where they email the public information officer directly, or some districts even have a form where you fill out name, address, information requested, all that information. But you cannot require individuals to submit their request on that form or to any particular person. If they send a public information request to you individually, it's still a Public Information Act request to the school district, regardless of whether or not they copied or sent it directly to the public information officer. You're also specifically prohibited under the Act, just very annoying to me because we always want to know, why do you want this? You are expressly prohibited from inquiring why a person is requesting the information. But what you can do, and we'll talk about the rules about this in a minute, you can ask for clarification or for narrowing if the request is unclear or if it's overbroad. But you can't ask the Houston Chronicle reporter, who's asked for copies of all contracts awarded since 2009, what do you want this for? You can't do that. Very, very, very important. And if Jesus were in the room, he'd be rolling his eyes at me because of how many times I have told him this. The TPIA only applies to information that is in existence, that currently exists at the time and the date that the request is made. And you are not responsible, there's no obligation to create new information in response to a request. Yes, sir?
And is that not the public's biggest misconception about the Public Information Act?
Yes, in my opinion, yes. That, and also, you're not required to conduct research or answer questions, which is also, in my opinion, a very common misconception by the public is, you're a governmental entity, you have to answer my questions. No, we don't. If I have a document, if I have a record that answers your question, I have to provide that to you under the TPIA, but I am under no obligation to, for example, if you want this information in a chart, and we currently don't have it in a chart, there's no rule that says I have to create the chart for you. I have to provide the records to you, period, and then I'm in the story. Then I've satisfied my obligation under the TPIA. So no new information. According to the Act, the information must be released promptly, and that's defined under the Act as soon as possible under the circumstances. That is, within a reasonable time without delay. There's a common misconception from the school district standpoint that, oh, we have 10 business days to get this information to the requester. No, that's not what the Act says. The Act says you have to release the information promptly. That means if they have asked for a copy of your check register, which is posted on your website, which, by the way, under the Act, you cannot simply refer a requester to a website and fulfill your obligations under the TPIA. But if it's on their website, and they say, I would like an electronic copy of your check register, and it literally is going to take you 30 seconds to click on the PDF copy of the check register, file save, and then ship it off. You can't wait 10 business days before you respond to that Public Information Act request. The 10 business day rule comes into play if you need to seek a ruling from the Attorney General. In other words, if you're trying to withhold information under one of the 50+ exceptions, and you have to go to the AG for that, that you have to make that request for a ruling within 10 business days. But let's say the requester asked for a whole lot of information, and we are physically and practically unable to produce the information within 10 business days. The Act recognizes that usually we all have other jobs other than the TPIA, and so allows us to, if we need to take more than 10 business days, all you have to do is certify that in writing to the requester, which can be through email, but you do have to say a date and a time of when the information will be available. Let's say that date and that time that you have forecast is quickly approaching and you think, there's no way I'm going to have it ready for then. Well, no problem. You just send another notice that says, we are unable to provide this information within 10 business days. We previously informed you we would have the information responsive to your request ready on February X at 5 p.m. However, we need additional time. Therefore, we are recertifying to you that we will have the information ready and just project out another date. There's no limit on how many times you can do that. The basic rule is you just need to keep the requester informed. If you want to withhold information based on an exception under the Act, and as I've said, there are more than 50 and there are numerous exceptions under the Act. The general rule, with some exceptions to the exception, is that you have to request a ruling from the AG's office, that the AG's office is the one that determines whether or not an exception applies, with a couple of exceptions. You can charge a requester fees for providing public information. The rules are incredibly complex as far as charges for public information. If the requester asks for information that's more than 50 pages of documents and then asks for copies, you can charge for the copies at the rate of 10 cents a page. You can charge for the personnel time spent gathering the responsive information at the rate of $15 an hour, and then you can charge for overhead, which is a flat rate of 20% of whatever the person charges on. However, if they ask for inspection, the rules become like this about what you can charge for. The general rule is if they've asked for inspection of documents, in other words, they want to come to your facility and physically look at the information responsive to the request as opposed to receiving copies of it. Really, the only thing you can charge for are mandatory redactions. And I've had the previous cost estimator and rules coordinator at the AG's office was Hadassah Schloss, and she was a wonderful individual. You could pick up the phone and have these difficult conversations with her. And so when I got a very difficult open records request years ago for inspection, I called her and I said, okay, what can I know I can charge for redactions. And she said, no, you can charge for mandatory redactions. And I said, well, which ones are mandatory and which ones are permissive? And she said, well, there's no list of which ones are mandatory and which ones are specific or permissive. And I said, well, that's helpful. But the general rule is a mandatory redaction is one of redaction of information that protects the interest of outside parties, of third parties. Permissive redactions or redactions that protect the interest of the school district. So for example, the attorney-client privilege is an exception under the TPIA where you can redact information that is protected by the attorney-client privilege between the school district and their attorney. Who does that protect? That protects the school district, right? And its relationship with its attorney. That's a permissive redaction, so you can't charge for that. They've asked for inspection. Mandatory redactions are, let's say, they include the home address, telephone number, etc. of school district personnel, which you can allow, hopefully all of you, when you began employment, you checked a box of whether or not you wanted to withhold your home address, telephone number, information about whether or not you have family members, etc. from the public. That protects interests of third parties. So you can charge because that's a mandatory redaction. But again, the rules are really complicated. You have to send a cost estimate letter if you estimate that the charges will be more than $40. So that's a pretty low threshold when you start taking into account that labor is $15 an hour. You quickly get to that $40. You are required to send a cost estimate letter, and there's various items that you have to address in the cost estimate letter, which I think we'll get to in a minute. So practically, what should your districts do? Train all individuals who routinely work on open records requests. If your division, individuals in your division are routinely responsible for gathering information responsive to a request or for dealing with open records requests directly, they should receive some sort of training and know what the requirements are of the TPIA. Very, very useful information. This should say 2014, not 2012. That's a typo on my part because it's been updated handbook. It's available on the Attorney General's website. It's about printed out, back-to-back pages. It's about this thick, but it's very helpful. It has examples, including examples for cost estimates, and it lists all the exceptions, and it goes through pertinent AG rulings, interpreting those exceptions. This is sort of the TPIA Bible, for lack of a better word. Consider a dedicated website or fax or email account only for open records requests. Again, you can't mandate that the public use that, but it is helpful to have that on your website because 98% of people are going to go on your website first and search around about who do I send public information back to. And then very importantly, establish an internal procedure for delivering this directed request. In other words, if it's not your job, if you're not the TPIA coordinator, and you receive an open records request, or anybody on your staff receives an open records request, they should know, who am I supposed to send this to? They shouldn't just go, I'm not responsible for that, delete. Or sit on it for 5 days before they ask anybody because the clock is ticking as soon as we receive the request. So here's some pretty simple common sense rules, but you would be surprised, or I am never cease to be amazed at when I'll have a client call and say, oh, we got an open records request. And I say, great, when did you get it? I don't know. It just came in. But I just got it today. Well, okay, but did it come directly to you? Well, no, so-and-so said, anyway, you get my point. So, very important, date and time stamp all incoming open records requests. If they're sent via email, that's easy because it's done for you. But if it's sent via mail or via fax, etc., just date and time stamp all incoming open records requests. The first thing I do before I do anything else is I calendar the 10th business day. Because for some of the exceptions, that you can waive your right to those exceptions if you do not timely ask for an AG ruling within 10 business days, like the attorney-client privilege. And the rules are similar to the mandatory versus permissive redactions. If the exception protects interest of third parties, even if you're past the 10 business days, you still ask for a ruling because the AG is going to send you back in its ruling. It's going to shake it, shake his their finger at you and say, you missed the 10 business day deadline. But nevertheless, because the exception you raise protects the interest of third parties, we have still considered your request. But if the exception protects the interest of the school district, like the attorney-client privilege, then they won't consider it. They're going to say you waived it if you didn't ask for the request within 10 business days. So that is a drop dead deadline. Carefully read the request. I'm never surprised that I will have one reading of a request and then I'll pick up the phone and call the client and say, okay, here's what I think we need to look for responsive documents. And they'll say, well, doesn't it also include this or this? So multiple people can read the request in different ways. It's not always clear cut of what is responsive. So carefully read the request and ask, do you need to ask for clarification? Is it clear what they're asking for? Do you think you'll need to do a cost estimate letter? If you do need to do if you think this is a by reading the request, that they're asking for a massive amount of information. And it's going to be more than $40. Then you're going to have to do a cost estimate letter. And what the AG wants you to do isn't just pull a number out of thin air and say, I think it'll take 5 hours to gather this information. 5 times 15 is this. Or I think, there's probably 500 pages responsive to this request. AG doesn't want you to do that. What the AG wants you to do is conduct a test, a sample of information. So let's say you receive an open records request for all invoices from a particular vendor for the last 5 years. You know this particular vendor is incredibly detailed. Their invoices are thick every month. Then what you would do, what I would suggest you do is pull 1 month. Pull 1 month as a sample. How long did it take you to pull that 1 month of information and to copy it if they've asked for copies? Count the number of pages for that 1 month and then do your cost calculation based on that. Multiply times 12, this is the approximate number of copies. Multiply times 12 for the amount of personnel time. This is approximately how long it's going to take. And do your cost estimate based on that. You're not required to tell the requester your process, what you did internally to reach that cost estimate, but I always keep in my file how I reached the cost estimate, what my math was, what sample of information I pulled and I used to reach the numbers that I put in the cost estimate letter. And why is that? Because the requester can always file a complaint with the AG's office and allege that you're overcharging. And if that's the case, usually what the AG's office does is they pick up the phone and they call you and they say, tell me how you reached the numbers in this request. And in my experience, every single time that I've been able to say, well, here's what I did. I pulled 1 month of information and I go through exactly what I did, and the complaints go away. But if I hadn't kept that calculate how I reached that calculation, then it's very speculative if I just tell the AG, well, we just thought that's what it would take. That's not going to cut it. So they want you to do some sort of test to reach that cost estimate. And finally, you definitely want to, sooner rather than later, circulate the request to appropriate staff with instructions and deadlines. And poor Jesus has received so many emails from me in the last 2 weeks because we have 50-something pending open records requests. Well, I asked him, Jesus, we've got another one, see below. Please pull, whether it's a sample of information or whether it's all the information, etc. And please get it to me by X date. He knows that's got to be before the 10th business day Because sometimes I don't know, without looking at the documents, what exception may apply. And I don't want to waive any exception, so I want to be able to look at it and go to the AG if we need to do that. For clarification, you can ask the requester to clarify an open records request if it's unclear. And so what the AG has interpreted the clarification rules to say is an agency can ask for clarification if it cannot reasonably understand a particular request. Or you can also request for the information to be the request to be narrowed if a large amount of information has been requested. You can discuss with the requester how you might narrow it. Usually what these entail is you'll get a request for all invoices or all contracts or all emails, or something with the all in it, and it doesn't have any time period associated with it. I think that is an overbroad request, and I can always ask for clarification and for narrowing of that. And as a general rule, I always do. And what I usually suggest is, for example, can you put a date range of the information you're asking for? And sometimes you get a kind of snarky email back, no, I meant all. Okay, but at least initially, I think in good faith, if you receive a request like that, you can ask for how you can narrow, including most often putting a date range on that. Very important, under the rules, you can pick up the phone and call the requester. You can email with the requester and talk about how you may clarify or narrow the request. But if you do it that way, you have to still count the request in your 10th business day and all the deadlines from the date you received the request. But if you comply with the rules, which say that you have to put your request for clarification or narrowing in writing, you have to explain the consequences of not responding, which is that the request will be considered automatically withdrawn if they don't respond to you within 61 days. You have to send it via certified mail. If you do all those three things, then if they respond back to you and say, well, regardless of, no, I meant what I said in the initial request, or, oh, I'll agree to receive, I really want information for the last fiscal year, or whatever the response is, then you are able to count from the day you receive clarification or narrowing. So your clock starts over. As opposed, but if you don't comply with the rules, if it's not in writing, if you pick up the phone and do it, or if you don't, you send a letter, send it via certified mail, or you don't explain the consequences of not responding, i.e. your request will be considered automatically withdrawn, then you can't start the clock over. So, very important in order to take advantage of that rule to meet all three requirements. Under the cost, we kind of went over this a little bit already, but under certain circumstances, like I said, you can charge for copies, labor, and overhead if it's more than 50 pages. And it greatly depends whether or not they've asked for copies or whether or not they've asked for inspection. Again, if it's more than $40, you're required to provide that written, itemized cost estimate before any work is undertaken. So don't gather all the documents and then send the cost estimate letter. You have to test to do your estimate and send the cost estimate letter. This is real important. I love when requests are more than $100, when my estimate's more than $100. Why? Because then I can mandate that they prepay 100%. So I sent a cost estimate letter out week before last of 8,400 something dollars. And over 100, legitimately, that's what our test showed, that that's what it was. Well, of course, I asked, and to make cited the rule that they prepay 100% of that amount before any work is undertaken. Well, guess what? They didn't do that. And why do I like when it's over 100? Because the penalty is if they don't respond and they don't pay within 10 business days, the request goes away. It's considered automatically withdrawn. And so if it's over 100% of the time, I'm going to mandate that they prepay 100%. There's a rule that's hidden. It's not directly in 552. It's in an administrative code provision that says if they ask for inspection, and you can only require that they prepay 50%. If they ask for copies, you can mandate that they prepay 100%. So make sure you take advantage of that rule. With third-party information, and this comes up in my experience most often in your world, in the business world, where, and the most common example is somebody, usually it's a student vendor, will ask for copies of all proposals submitted in response to RFP number 123. Well, depending on what it's for, but for sure if it's technology related, what does every vendor stamp every single page of their proposal with? Confidential and proprietary, right? Even if it's not really confidential and proprietary. I don't want to make that decision of what's confidential and proprietary. So as a rule, if the request is asking for information of third parties, and which third party there may be confidential or proprietary information, then you have to, by the rule, you have to ask for an AG ruling within 10 business days. You don't have to take a position though. And usually with these, I don't. I'll ask for the AG ruling and I'll say, I'll cite the rule that says that we have to ask for the AG ruling, but I won't take a position about whether something is confidential or not, because it's not our information, it's the information of the third parties. So you have to ask for the AG ruling, and then you have to notify each of the affected third parties of the request and of their opportunity to submit arguments to the AG's office of why their information should be withheld. And there's a specific form on that you can download it from the AG's website of that third party notice letter. So basically it shifts the obligation to usually the vendor or whoever the third party is to show the AG why their information is confidential and proprietary. You can guess that the AG's interpretation of confidential and proprietary is incredibly narrow. Vendors want to argue constantly that what is protected? Their price, right? They don't want their competitor to know what their prices are. And the AG consistently rules, they have to use this copy and paste language, and no matter who's sending you their ruling, of something along the lines of nothing is more public than pricing and documents relating to the expenditure of public funds. In my experience, what they have let them withhold are references. References are considered by the AG to be confidential, but only if the vendor submits arguments and argues to withhold that information. References, and if something is truly proprietary, and that's a very high standard to meet. You almost have to, be describing a patent process, or even copyright. They won't let you withhold automatically. They will tell you can't copy it to give it to the third party, but the third party can come, or the requester can come in and look at it. But it's a really high standard to meet. But just be aware that if they're asking for that third party information, go to the AG and then notify each of the third parties.
Sarah, what about their financials in a RFP? Because that's one of the requirements a lot of times, is prove to us your.
That's a really good question.
Right.
So Louise asked, what about a company's financials?
If it's private, you can.
I believe we've changed our RFP here to where we don't ask for that automatically. We used to, and then we're having to go to the AG on every single one because it included that. But that they will, if they argue the right thing, the right exception, they'll let them withhold that. The other thing that is also common with proposals are they'll attach at least the first page of their insurance, and that has the insurance policy number. That can be redacted without one of the AG 59236 as an access device number. But yes, usually there's specific financial information, depending on how detailed it is. The AG, and if they didn't argue the right thing, the AG will let them hold that. So another common thing we run across, although usually not in your world, in the business world, more in the academic world, is FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act. And that protects student information, confidential information, and education records. Under the rules, thankfully, the school district gets to determine what is protected by FERPA. And in fact, if you submit FERPA protected information to the AG, they will send you a nasty note back that says you can't even submit it to us. We are not an authorized party to receive information under FERPA. So if it's student information, we get to decide if we heavily redact or withhold in their entirety FERPA protected information. If it's particularly when redaction isn't sufficient. So if you receive an open records request from somebody who's not a parent, not a guardian, has no access to this kid's information, but says, I want to see the report cards or all files relating to X student. Well, even if I redact the student's name, if I'm submitting the information, they're still going to know that's who it is because it's responsive to the request. So in that case, we withhold everything. But hopefully, you guys won't be dealing with FERPA. Everybody's favorite topic when it comes to the TPIA, or email. I should now change this though to say beware of email, and then I should also add a text messaging side there too, because more and more of us are using texting, including in the transaction of official business. So, TPIA and just electronic communications, email, texting, instant messaging, Facebook messaging, whatever the case may be. Pre-Senate Bill 1368, which went into effect on September 1st, 2013, emails, text to and from a trustee or from any school official, not just trustees, relating to district business were subject to the TPIA, regardless of where they're stored, whether they're stored on a personal account or on a district account. And there's all these AG opinions and rulings that said that. But now, it's explicitly part of 552. Senate Bill 1368 added to the definition of public information, and now it explicitly states that public information applies to and includes any electronic communication created, transmitted, received, or maintained on any device, regardless of whether your district pays for your device, doesn't matter. If, and here's the giant big if the communication is in connection with a transaction official business. So if you use your personal iPad, your personal iPhone, your personal Motorola, whatever, and you're texting back and forth with your boss or with a staff member or whoever, or with a vendor about district business, those communications are subject to the TPIA. Even if your district doesn't pay for your cell phone or your iPad or whatever, or your Hotmail account or your Gmail account, etc. But the converse is true too. If you use your district email account to email your significant other and say, don't forget it's Valentine's Day, I'm expecting a nice dinner tomorrow night, is that subject to the TPIA? No, it's not. Even if it's, jmeswa@hcbe-texas.org, even if it's on the district email account. Why? Because it's not in connection with the transaction of official business. So those truly personal emails or text messages, etc., are not subject to the TPIA. Even if the district does pay for your personal device. If you use your not personal devices, it wouldn't be personal anymore, but even if the district pays for your cell phone or your iPad, and you occasionally send personal related messages or emails over that, just because the district pays for it doesn't mean that the public has automatic access to that information. Can the district go in and search that information? Absolutely. I'm pretty sure that your CH local, your electronic policy says such a thing, that basically something along the lines of you have no right to privacy in your district communications, district open, etc. But the public would nevertheless not have access to those truly personal emails, text messages, etc. So also, Senate Bill 1368 amended the media. Remember, went through microfilm and all that stuff on which public information is recorded. So now it states a magnetic, optical, solid state, or other device. The legislature just said, who knows what's going to come up in the future, what new gadget we're all going to come up with and be addicted to in 2 years. So they just said, or other device that can store an electronic signal. And just in case you were wondering, any physical material in which information may be recorded, including if you print your contracts out on linen or silk, those would be subject to the TPIA law. And finally, it amended the general form in which the media containing public information exists to now expressly include emails, internet postings, regardless of whether or not it's posted on a district site, Facebook or anything else, text messages, instant message, or other electronic communication is now subject to the TPIA. So quickly, here are some of the more common exceptions to the TPIA. For these, you don't have to go to the AG. You can just automatically withhold these without going to the Attorney General. Direct deposit or authorization forms, I-9 forms and attachments, W-2 and W-4s, a certified agenda or a tape of a closed session, a fingerprint you can withhold without going to the AG. Also, L2 and L3 immigration declarations, a Texas driver's license number, a copy of a Texas driver's license, a license plate number, the portion of a photograph that reveals a license plate number, so any portion of it, and the portion of a photo depicting a discernible license plate number. You can withhold those. Very often in your world, we will withhold and redact what we call access device numbers, which are credit card numbers, or a portion of a credit card number. So what do you usually see on receipts? The last 4 digits. That's got to be redacted under 552.136. And we can do that. We can redact it without the necessity of going up to the AG's office and asking for approval. So credit card number, debit card number, charge card number, as we discussed earlier, insurance policy numbers. Yes, sir.
Is it permissible to redact, and like if someone asks for a copy of a check register, which may include reimbursements to employees, is it permissible to redact the names of the employees?
No. That's public information.
Employee
numbers. Employee numbers we redact usually as non-responsive, because they haven't asked for it. So long as it gives other information. So if it says, it has the employee number, but then gives the employee name, or at least the division, that's public information, whether somebody or not has been reimbursed or something. Now, if they want the backup to that, if they follow up and say, I reviewed your check register, please send me the invoice or request for reimbursement for the following individuals, then that's when you got to go through and you start redacting the credit card numbers. I even take it like, I'll redact some people's frequent flyer numbers. A lot of times they'll print out if they've taken a flight and they're requesting reimbursement for a flight. It'll include the credit card number, but it'll also include their frequent flyer number. I redact that too as access device number. Absolutely, and that's a different exception. You're an overachiever, we've been here. Bank account numbers and bank routing numbers. So let's say they want copies of the checks. If we have them, if we keep those are maintained by us, you have to redact the routing number and the bank account number before we can do. But you can do all that without going to the AG's office first. You can also redact an email address of a member of the public under 552.137. There's an exception to this though. If you pull 552.137, it says an email address of a member of the public other than a member of the public who's seeking to do business with the district. So if you have vendor email addresses, they're seeking to do business with us, then that would not be able to be withheld under the TPIA. Their email addresses would be public information. A Form DD-124, other military discharge record, as long as it came into the governmental body's possession on or after September 1st, 2003, never use this exception to provide. And then finally, as you were referencing, certain addresses, phone numbers, and personal family information. This is covered by 552.117 in conjunction with 552.024, which allows, it's not an automatic thing, it's a person-by-person thing. It allows an individual, officer, or trustee, employee of a school district to elect, if you only have, I think it's 14 days, 10 or 14 days, within the date of first appointment or with the trustees in which they were first sworn in, to elect to withhold your address, your phone number, your personal email address, and information about whether or not you have family members. So a lot of times, as a district employee will ask who your emergency contact is. The other way that this will come up is it just truly on personnel information or on information, like we talked about earlier, request for reimbursement where an individual's address or phone number may be listed. If they've elected to withhold that information, you can redact that without the AG first. But I offer, like I said, it's an individual by individual determination. And if I have that information of a particular employee, I always go on the phone to HR and ask, has this person elected to withhold this information? They tell me yes or no, and then I decide, then I would either redact or release it. Another where recently this week, this one came up, which was sort of odd, was a check register. Where they were, not the check register, they were asking for a spreadsheet of total compensation to employees. Well, you all know your total compensation is public information. Anybody can find out what you make. But on the report, the record that we had that showed that also included whether or not the individual was making payments for their family for health insurance. And they said, well, but that's part, is that part of compensation? Well, then I asked, do we pay for any of that? No. The answer was no, we don't pay for any of that. I said, well, then redact it under 552.117 and 552.124, because that reveals whether or not the person has family members. If that showed up there that this person was deducting X amount a month to pay the premiums for any kind of dependent or spouse, that information is protected. So that would be redacted. If you rely, these are all, the reason why we can redact all of these things without going to the AG first is because the AG put out Open Records Decision number 684. I guess the AG got tired of dealing with all of these exceptions. So issued one AG ruling and said, from here on out, all governmental entities, you can rely on this particular ruling 684, and you can redact these things without the necessity of going to the AG first. But if you do that, you have to notify the requester in writing of the decision or ruling on which you're relying. So we just have a one sentence. The attached responsive information includes redactions that were made pursuant to Open Records Decision number 684. And then our requirement is met. Some other exceptions that are common, again, these are not all because there's still 11, but some other common exceptions where you do have to go to the AG first in order to withhold information are 552.102, dates of birth of public employees and transcripts of professional public employees. You can withhold, but you gotta go to the AG first. 552.103, information that's relating to litigation involving the district or an officer or employee of the district is accepted from disclosure if, there's a condition, if either the litigation is pending, or currently in litigation, a lawsuit has been filed, or litigation is reasonably anticipated on the date the requester submits the request. This one's temporal in nature. When the parties to the litigation have inspected the records pursuant to a court order or discovery or anything like that, then this section can no longer be revoked. Or if the lawsuit is over, then this exception can no longer be revoked. Importantly, in our context from a school district perspective, the AG has ruled that when somebody files a grievance, whether that's an employee grievance or a vendor grievance, that litigation is reasonably anticipated. And so we can withhold information under this section in that case. 552.104, important for you guys, information relating to competition or bidding. This one's also temporal in nature. It's information that, if released, would give an advantage to a competitor or to a bidder. But it does not accept bids from public disclosure after the bidding is complete and the contract has been executed. So again, just this week, you tell me a lot with TPIA stuff. We had one where a requester asked for, a competitor asked for copies of all proposals submitted in response to RFP number X. But the board hadn't awarded the contract yet. It was set for Monday's agenda for the board to award the contract. So what did I advise? We go to the AG and we argue 104. Because the contract hadn't been awarded yet, it's still an open bid. We could still have the ability to negotiate, if we're using a CSP, with the vendors. And so until that's closed, it's protected under 552.104. As we discussed earlier, 552.107, information within the attorney-client privilege. have to go to the AG in order to withhold that information, and there's various things you have to show, i.e., this was a privileged communication. It was communications between a lawyer and a client, and they're rendering of legal advice. Now, the question I get all the time is, oh, well, I'll just copy you on all emails, and that way they'll be protected by the attorney-client privilege. No. Simply copying an attorney on an email doesn't make it fall within the attorney-client privilege as an attorney-client privilege communication. You have to either be seeking or asking for legal advice, or I have to be giving legal advice. So, you know, Jesus will laugh because he has seen me do this so many times before. And Thomas, I know that Ellen does it with you guys too. Y'all will copy us on an email, you know, just and say FYI, see below. Well, you haven't asked me anything. You haven't asked for my legal advice, but I know I don't want this, you know, these communications is a hot issue. I don't want this to get out. So even if you haven't asked me anything, I will respond and say, I advise, because again, I'm seeking, you know, legal advice. I advise X, Y, Z, because I'm trying to capture it within the attorney-client privilege. But just copying and CCing a lawyer on an email communication or any other communication isn't going to automatically protect the document as attorney-client privilege. 552.107, certain law enforcement records. This one really comes into play if your school district has its own police force. We'll deal a lot with 552.107. And 552.111, it's called agency memoranda, but actually encompasses a lot more than just agency memoranda. It's interagency, so communications among individuals in your own school district, or interagency memorandums or letters that would not be available by law to a party in litigation. It covers two different privileges. The first is what's called the deliberative process privilege. That's either intra-agency or interagency communications consisting of advice, opinions, or recommendations on policy-making matters of the district. So even if you're communicating with a consultant of the district, who, let's say, for example, is doing a study of one of your departments, and you're sending drafts back and forth, I would argue those drafts are communications, interagency communications, but the document has to relate to policy-making matters. And that's where usually districts will get tripped up. They'll argue and say, oh, drafts are protected under public information. Only if they relate to policy-making matters. So I have made many a stretch of an argument about how a document draft relates to a policy-making matter. Some successful, some unsuccessful. But just remember, this one applies. If somebody's asking for your drafts, go back and read 552.111 and see if there's an argument there that you can seek to withhold that. It also protects the work product privilege. That's material prepared or mental impressions that are put down in a record, developed in anticipation of litigation or for trial, not just by a lawyer, but by a party, i.e. the school district, or a party's representative, like a district employee. So if you're dealing with a grievance, or you think, you know, a vendor grievance or an employee grievance or with litigation, and you're emailing your superintendent saying, here's my best thoughts, here's what I think we should do. We should settle, and here's why, or I think we should move forward, and here's why. That's likely protected under the work product privilege. So that is the TPIA in a nutshell. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. Otherwise, have a wonderful Valentine's Day tomorrow, and a very happy Mardi Gras on Tuesday. Thanks for having me, guys.